The sitting is resumed. Senator Greenwich.
Mr. President, I must admit you caught me by surprise. As some people would say, with my pants down.
That would be the first time.
But, Mr. President, I want to make a very short contribution to the debate. This bill, the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management Bill, which Senator Cummins spoke on earlier. Ma'am, this is nothing out of the ordinary. Mr. President, the management of some extremely large international airports, and I repeat, sir, the management of some of those airports is leased out. Indeed, sir, I would not be surprised if clauses which have been inserted in our legislation have not been taken wholesale from legislation in other jurisdictions, some close by and some far away, and just dropped into our Barbadian legislation. Sir, it takes a lot of money to manage and to properly supervise an airport. And I make bold to say, Mr. President, that if not properly managed, an airport can be extremely costly, and it can be very demanding on government's purse strings. Unlike Senator Franklin, sir, I see this legislation as a cost-cutting measure. That, to me, is what this debate should be about. I know you had to intervene during his presentation, sir, and the theme of his speech is that we are, in his own words, giving away our assets.
Not my words,
that we are giving it to a Lord and Master. But I want to say, sir, that this is not a privatization exercise. This is not a privatization exercise. Even this morning, as I was on my way to the Senate, I heard on the radio, and I'm sure I can be supported by the young gentleman who just walked in, that there was a gentleman on the radio who was saying that they are giving away the airport. And sir, there will be those, like Senator Franklin and that gentleman who called in, who will want to put a privatization spin on what is essentially nothing more than a change in modus operandi. That is all it is. It is a transformation, a simple transformation exercise. The Grantley Adams Airport, sir, will still be 100% owned by Barbadians. Some have likened it, sir, to the sale of the Barbados National Bank. I remember the same caller that I was speaking about earlier making this point. Senator Franklin remarked about how the last government gave away light and power. This is no such deal. This is no such deal. And those who want to criticize us for this particular measure should not give the impression that government is, in the words of that fellow, giving away everything, including, or even, he said, giving away everything, even the airport. A detractor on the radio this morning. Senator Franklin kept asking the question, are we giving or going to give away the airport? Let me put it this way, sir. This is not one of those popular 51%, 49% arrangement. This is no such deal. Government is not giving away a single percent of ownership to anyone. This is not even something which can be described as a lease with an option to purchase or any such arrangement. Nothing here, sir, is for sale or for purchase. I believe, sir, that things like the store owners at the airport will now have to arrange their rent, make their arrangements for rent and so on through the new airport management system. And so I believe that that is going to be a far more tidier arrangement than what presently exists, far more efficient. And in a way, to me, it's a good thing because government's detractors will not be able to say that Mr. X has a stall at the airport only because he is the friend of the minister or because he's a party supporter, because they know that that is one of the quickest things that leaves the mouth of certain people. The management company, I know, will not allow things like rents and so on to go up into thousands and thousands of dollars as presently exists, and then all the pressure is being put on the government. Senator Franklin continued in his speech. He said it is giveaways and harebrained schemes, and we are taking the assets and giving them to whosoever will. And he and other detractors, sir, they speak as though the government of Barbados is just going to put a management team in place and look at it as we would say to Suki King and say, go as you please. But sir, obviously there is going to be a contract in place, and that management company is going to manage the airport according to the terms set out in that contract. Contract will have things like the length of time, how many years, and how and why the contract can be terminated, and other things. There's going to be a contract there. So my point, sir, is that the detractors should not give the impression that this thrust towards leasing the management of the airport is something novel that Barbados is doing, that this government is doing. I do believe, sir, that instead of all of the criticism coming from the detractors, criticizing the Grantley Adams Airport and the leasing management and so on, we should appreciate what we have. But we love to complain. There's certain people who have complained and complaining, I almost said complain, in their DNA. In their DNA. The only thing they seem to be born to do is to complain. You know, when the COVID hit us, okay, as well, no, I'm not as well. No. the government gave some care packages and so on. You hear they're giving them to their supporters.
Yes.
And then when the ashfall came and you had people cleaning up the place, you heard that they were looking for work for their supporters. And then
Them ain't cleaned up by me.
when Elsa came, still the same criticism continued.
You roll up by me, Joe get 24.
And they kept complaining and complaining. Even now, they're complaining. Sir, I would like to divert, like Senator Franklin did, for a brief moment, just to say something about my experience with people who complain. Sir, when I first left Barbados to go, and I like to draw from my experience teaching, to go overseas to teach. You know, government, in that place, they put me in a 3-bedroom house to live. Say, Mr. Greenwich, this is yours, and you live here. 3 bedrooms, and I felt so comfortable. And sir, I had come from a house where I was not the boss in the house. More than my, I was not the only person in the house. I was not the only person in the house, sir. And but sir, I am now comfortable. I am now comfortable. And the house is well appointed. The best furniture, dinette set, everything. Couldn't be more comfortable. But I arrived with other teachers from Guyana and from Trinidad in particular, those 2 places. And every day, every single day from the time I landed until it was now coming up to Christmas time. September was when I got there, and coming up to December, and they were still complaining. And they were complaining about the dinette set in their house. It was wrong. Some of them said they wanted a square one. Some said theirs was square, and they wanted an oblong one, and so on. And they kept complaining. Some said the drapes did not match the color, and the decor was not what they wanted. And they kept complaining every single day. And we are now almost going home for Christmas, and they're complaining. And I will never forget a young local teacher at that school. At lunchtime one day when the complaints had got to her. And she got up in the lunchroom with them and said, let me tell you all something, see? When you're all going home for Christmas, I go into Trinidad with you all. And then coming up for next summer, I go into Guyana with you all. Now, I'll tell you something about those people that she's telling this stuff. They had names like Prasad, Mohammed, Dilshan, Kumar, Hari Singh, Ram Loshan. Some of them are still today my best friends. And she said to them, let me tell you all something. I am going home with you all. And I want you all to take me to the houses that you live at, so that I can compare the houses you live at to what you are given here. They had 3 and 4 bedroom houses they are given. And from the moment she said so, until the day I left the Turks and Caicos Islands, they never complained again. That challenge alone was enough. And they never complained again. I only want to come and see the houses that you all live in and make the comparison. And so, sir, all I'm saying, and the point I'm making, is that regardless of what this government does, whether the government leases out the management of the airport or whether this government paves the streets with gold, there is still going to be partisan criticism. There is still going to be partisan criticism.
You know the paper,
And so, you know, I have never been on a plane coming into Barbados and hear the pilot say, we are arriving at the DLP airport or the BLP airport. Never heard it yet. I've always heard we're arriving at the Grantley Adams airport. This is our airport. It is our airport. I don't see why we should be tearing it to pieces and this thing is bad and the next thing is bad. Like that dissertation we had in here today. Sir, government has reached the point where cost-cutting measures have become necessary. And I think we should applaud government for taking steps to ensure that they make things more efficient in the manner that they're attempting to do with this piece of legislation. You know, sir, I operate an office in Belmont Road. And I stand there sometimes I'm in the car, I'm looking at the road, and I see transport board buses marked Bayfield. When I say Bayfield, they're going at me. That is where I live. The last district before you get to Bayfield is the one I live in. I see those buses, and when I look up, sir, 4 people in the bus. And that bus heads to Bayfield. And very often I see them coming down transport board buses. And when you look, 3 and 4 people in the bus again coming down. And you pause and you say, what a waste. There's a driver there in that bus that the government has to pay. There's wear and tear that government has to look for. And then there's also diesel. But if you calculate every day, about 6, 8, 10 days, 10 times a day, buses going up, making a terrible loss. Buses coming down, terrible loss. And if government ever say, let us sit down and let us discuss, only discuss, the management of transport or the transport board, oh my Lord, that would be a real fiasco. Everybody would be jumping on government. But these things we never stop to consider, that very often you have to pull back. And you have to pull back every now and then. But sir, don't get me wrong. I would never advocate that this government abandons its responsibility to the public and give full rein for public transport of our people to any management group. I wouldn't. I expect, Mr. President, government to provide certain services to Barbadians regardless of the cost. Regardless of the cost. I expect that to happen. Government must deal with things like transportation and health care and child care and all the rest of it, COVID and ashfall and ELSA. Government must deal with all of those things regardless of the cost. But the basic point which is being made, sir, is that there is nothing wrong with government divesting itself of responsibility in certain areas if those areas can be run efficiently without government having to take such a loss. That is the point I'm making. Senator Franklin poo-pooed. That is not even parliamentary language. But he tried to belittle and to cry down the whole arrangement with Harrison Cave, I'm sorry. I have read of the management company, I think it's called Chucker, that manages Harrison. And from what I understand, there are about 8 other Caribbean countries that this particular company works with. I will put my neck to the block that in none of those countries, when they had the opportunity to debate that management arrangement with Chucker, that there was a speech that came close to the one that Senator Franklin made in this chamber today. Now, I don't think a single person in the opposition or anywhere would get up and make a speech like the one we heard in here today about giving away this and giving away that. I understand what that particular management company is saying. I think what they are saying about our cave is that if you went to the cave 20 times, it is the same as if you went there once. What they're trying to say is that the same stalagmites and stalactites are there, and that is all there is to it. And they're saying that children, for instance, who would have gone there at the age of 5 and gone back at 8 and 12 and 17 are saying the same thing over and over again. And they're saying, well, look, you need to have new things. You need to have new things, new attractions, that when you get there, there'll be other things at the cave for you to do. And they're saying we can provide those things. We can manage it. Now, to date, I am very pleased with the new energy which this particular company is showing. They have new, fresh ideas. I, sir, cannot fully assess, I'm not going to sugarcoat what they are doing or what they can do. I think we have to wait and see. I think it's a bit too early. But it does seem to me as though they are a very capable company. Now, I know that there are a lot of people who have spoken about diversification of the economy and the danger of relying too much on tourism and so on. But at this junction of our history, Mr. President, I am satisfied, sir, that is easier said than done. I think right now we are a tourism-dependent country, and I don't think that we should try to kick against the pricks at this particular juncture of our history. I believe, sir, that Barbados can be proud of the Grantley Adams Airport. Our airport, even though it's a small airport, sir, it has been ranked as international for many years. And we have been commended, sir, on all aspects, or for all aspects of safety, from baggage handling to airport markings, from scanners and other security measures. And even quite recently, I read something which my sister showed me in the someone, a visitor to the island, was commending Barbados for being extremely strict on its protocols and so on. We have been commended for that. Yes, we are strict. We have been commended. I think, sir, we can be proud of the Grantley Adams Airport. We have kept up to date, and our standards are high, even though, yes, we are small. And I don't think, sir, that we can be going out of our way to encourage visitors to come to Barbados and then letting them have a bad experience at our airports. And so, Mr. President, I believe that the red caps and the baggage handlers, the immigration officers, the shop assistants, they must all play their part in continuing to let people say that Barbados is still one of the best in the region. Yeah, I would stick my neck out, Mr. President, and say that we are one of the best small airports in the world. Certainly, as I said, one of the best in the region. And I think that we rank favorably with airports of a similar size anywhere in the world.
You did it with Barbadians.
I believe so. And some people do it. Some of our people do it. I believe it's unfair to compare the Grantley Adams Airport with places like Miami and Kennedy and Heathrow and Gatwick and Toronto and so on. So those, as you well know, sir, there are elaborate, sprawling airports which literally blow your mind. You have to take a bus from one end of one airport, of a particular airport, to the next. And I know the first time a friend of mine got on a SkyTrain in Miami, the person marveled, couldn't believe that that is taking you from one part of Miami airport to the next. And sir, as you know, you can be sitting on the tarmac and you can look up and witness about 20 planes landing in some of those airports in about half an hour. If 20 planes land in Barbados in a day, that's an excellent day for us. But you can sit in less than half an hour and count 20 planes landing in some of those airports. You can even sit in the tarmac, sir, and you are number 12 with 11 planes ahead of you for takeoff. You can't compare us with those airports. Some of those airports are open 24/7, most of them. And when I say 24/7, they're open 24/7 and busy 24/7. You know, our airport may very well close at midnight. You can't compare us with those airports. And Mr. President, coming from Cayman with a friend of mine, he was going to Trinidad and he was going to get married. And we had a bare half an hour to take the plane to come home. He was to be the groom at the wedding. He didn't have any time to shop in Miami. He bought his suit, the suit that he got married in. He bought it at the airport. I mean that when you are in those airports, it is as if you're downtown. It's as if you're in a mall somewhere. You cannot compare Barbados to those places. Those large international airports and so on, sir, they sell everything. You can be in there and pick your choice. Burger King, McDonald's, Nathan's, Kentucky, whatever you pick your choice. Pick your choice. Like if you're downtown. We have Chef, yes. And you see, the point I'm making though is this, that I believe that the people who operate those shops in the airports, in those large airports, I believe that they make a considerable profit because of the volume of passengers. You know, and because of that volume, profit is virtually guaranteed. It's a different kind of volume here in Barbados. And the reason I make that point is this. I caution government And I caution the management company against giving any of the operators at the airport any minimum revenue guarantee. Let the big airports do that. And say, once I put you here, I will ensure that you make so much and so much. And I pledge that I will make up any shortfall in revenue which you experience. I do not agree that government or the management company here should be doing something like that. As I said, we do not have the volume for it. And the lesson that our businessmen have to learn is that business is a risk. And business is about market forces. And there should be no clause such as the one I've spoken about in that kind of arrangement. Store owners should not expect that at all. And I would be less than truthful, sir, if I said that shopping at our airport is attractive. I'd be less than truthful. I do believe, sir, that things like the Barbadian souvenirs and Barbadian rum and so on, Tortuga cake and so on, things which are peculiar to Barbados, I think that they do well and they have done well. But there always appears to be a challenge in selling those products which are not typically Barbadian. And perhaps, sir, it is because those items, the other items beside the Barbadian items, they are far cheaper in the countries that the visitors come from. And it may not be, the urge may not be there for them to purchase these things here. But at the same time, Mr. President, I would caution Barbadians against selling the same products in each and every kiosk, in each and every shop at the airport. Because, you know, we have a habit selling the same t-shirts, the same rum cake, the same thing over and over again. And I think that our store owners would have to brush up on their product selection. But Mr. President, I even spoke longer than I anticipated that I would, but I give my full support to this particular bill. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Greenwich. Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't intend to be long or to be lengthy in my contribution with respect to this bill. Of course, sir, I give my full support to this bill. Maybe I can start where Senator Greenwich ended. And Senator Greenwich did indicate that it is unfair to compare Grantley Adams International Airport with larger airports. And I started to think about the size of Grantley Adams. I can't remember the exact size. I know that we knew what then in 2004, 5, so that would have been additional 70,000 square feet with respect to the arrivals hall. So I'm going to guesstimate, Minister, that Grantley Adams International Airport could be a couple 100,000 feet, square feet. But when I think of JFK is 12 square miles. And if my memory is correct, I'm not sure of the precise figures, but I believe that 1 square mile is a little less than 28 million square feet. If I'm wrong, please correct me. And that just is to point out the extent of the size of an international airport such as Grantley Adams when compared with that of JFK. There was also, sir, reference made by Senator Franklin a little earlier in his contribution about the airport and giving away the airport, and I think that Senator Greenidge certainly spoke to that very definitively. There is no giving away of the Grantley Adams International Airport. The Grantley Adams International Airport belongs to the people of Barbados. And I've heard nothing to suggest that government is contemplating anything other than that. What I do know is that this legislation speaks to the issue of the transfer of the management and vesting of assets. And sir, this is not a model that is vulgar in any way. This is not a model that in any way subtracts from the pride and joy that Barbadians can take in the Grantley Adams International Airport. But there's certain realities that we have to face. Sir, the Heathrow Airport is operated, yes, owned, but operated as well by a separate entity. Not by the government of the UK. It's operated by a consortium that involves the Spanish entity. It involves the China Corporation. The point that I'm making is that this model is not new. Even in a situation, if we go back to JFK, if we go to LaGuardia, though owned by those cities, those and if we go to Newark as well, Newark is owned by the city of it's Newark, and there's another entity, Elizabeth, that owns, I think, Newark, but it's operated by another entity. And the point is, and I believe that entity is the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The point is that there are times when, in order to be able to get a greater benefit out of the asset that you have, that you give that asset to an entity that has a high level of competence in being able to carry out its operations. Reference was made to Harrison's Cave. We know that there was a process that with requests for proposals that was undertaken. And again, Senator Greenidge spoke in relation to that, the manner in which that was executed. And I want, sir, to just reflect on something for this chamber. In 2008, I believe, sir, it was the 15th of January 2008. That is the date of the 2008 general election. I believe that is the date. On the 15th of January, the role that I was performing then was Parliamentary Secretary in the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport. At that time, a new cargo facility at the Grantley Adams International Airport was identified as being critical and important because there are elements to the operations of the airport outside of just the arrival of passengers. There are issues related to cargo. Sir, in 2018, I was appointed to sit on the board of the Grantley Adams International Airport, Inc., GIA Inc. And to my surprise, one of the major items for consideration related to a new cargo facility at the Grantley Adams International Airport. And while, sir, I can stand in here and I can speak about the incompetence of the last government, and that may have had some factor contributing to the inability to get where persons may have wanted to go. The truth is, it has to be thought of or discussed in the context of resources. We just do not have all of the available resources to do all of the things we would want to do. And sir, I speak about a time that is pre-COVID-19. In this COVID-19 environment, and I'm not going to go over the issue with respect to the loss in revenues, I mean, that is clear. That has been talked about over and over. And it is my opinion, sir, that this arrangement allows for not simply the management aspect of the airport, but the developmental aspect of the airport as well, and leveraging resources which the government of Barbados today does not have at its disposal. And I believe, Mr. President, that that is extremely important. So the government of Barbados is not giving away the airport. The government is not selling the airport. The airport continues to belong to the people of Barbados. I do have to say, sir, that even at a time like this, the airport has just been going through some significant pavement and rehabilitation works to make sure that we are still able to accommodate the bigger aircraft that are coming here. And you know, I believe it is Virgin, Minister will correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that Virgin will be bringing a larger aircraft, the new Airbus aircraft, into Barbados with a greater level of capacity coming in. And sir, these things would not be able to occur if the works had not been undertaken at the Grantley Adams International Airport, the construction of the eastern and southern aprons, the landside roads, and different replacement of asphalt that would have taken place with respect to the runways. And I say that, sir, only to signal that it is the expectation that under the PPP, we will see significantly more activity that is undertaken for the developmental aspect of the airport. So the expectation is that, yes, the airport is given to an entity under the lease arrangement for the 30 years, but that when the government and people of Barbados are given the airport again, that it would be significantly more valuable, and there would have been significant development that would have been undertaken at the Grantley Adams International Airport. Mr. President, I just want to speak very briefly to the issue of the processing of passengers at the airport, because I do know that this is a matter of concern. This has been raised by the BHD, and I know that the COVID subcommittee, I know that the Minister of Tourism and International Transport and others are presently actively looking at this, and I certainly look forward to further discussion, because we do have to ensure that the experience of our visitors coming to our destination is one that is exceptional. I always say, sir, that we can have the most effective marketing so that we can go out in the source markets and we can get everybody enticed to come to Barbados. But that moment of truth is when they land here and the reality of the experience which they have. And I want to give the commitment that the BHDA is willing to work and collaborate with government in ensuring that that experience through the Grantley Adams International Airport is significantly enhanced. As it relates to the issue, sir, of vaccination and testing, I only want to say that recently we would have had discussions with the Barbados Workers Union, and we are going to be partnering in relation to a public relations campaign with respect to vaccination and testing, because we consider that to be critical and very, very important. And I would have, in a meeting recently with Minister Cummings, also made reference to that, and I know that the Ministry of Tourism is willing to participate with us as well. The truth is, there's a lot of, I don't really like to use the word fake news, because of where it originated, I must tell you, or became well known, but they are popular. But there's a lot of fake news and a lot going around on social media. And sir, I was listening I can't remember which news station it was in the USA, but the announcer said that dealing with COVID-19 has now become a pandemic for the unvaccinated. And I want to, sir, use this opportunity to encourage Barbadians to get vaccinated. It is the best course of action when you do all your research, when you review all of the information. The reality is that those who are fully vaccinated are better able to deal with this COVID-19. And it appears, sir, that COVID-19 is not going away next week or week after or even next year. Mr. President, there was a time when sometimes when this chamber met, I was not in attendance because I had to travel in order to represent my members and in order to assist with the promotion of Barbados as a tourism destination. I have not traveled, sir, since February of last year. Since February of 2020, I haven't traveled. And the truth is, I always said on those occasions when I was missing from the chamber that the business of getting visitors here is to get in the source markets and to ensure that we keep Barbados top of mind and bring them here. But the truth is, we want to exist in an environment that is safe. And it appears from all of the information available that the best way for us to protect ourselves would be to take the vaccine. So I want, sir, from this place to plead with Barbadians to take the vaccine so that we can start, sir, to see some activity that we would want to see, sir, because we have to be supportive of those who are the medical experts and be guided by the science. And I want to encourage all of us, sir, to do that. Mr. President, just one final comment in these short remarks. Minister would have indicated that there is going to be a new civil aviation authority which would have responsibility for upper and lower airspace. And I am extremely happy to hear that. Of course, sir, I believe it was from the 1960s, the airspace above 24,500 square feet was really given, yes, and it's still happening now. That airspace is controlled by PRCO. They're the custodians of the airspace. In fact, Minister, as I reflect on that, I do recall that there was an entity that collected user fees on behalf of the region, the Eastern Caribbean. That was Air Radio Caribbean Limited. And then that entity was changed out into a Trinidadian entity, and I believe the name was Caribbean Air Navigation and Advisory Services. And essentially what happened was that any airplane flying over Barbados from 24,500 square feet and higher paid those user fees to PRCO, and then the monies was transferred after taking out certain operational expenses to the different countries in the Eastern Caribbean. I'm not sure if that is still being undertaken. Minister says yes. But what is very important, I think, and very encouraging is that Barbados is now looking at the upper and lower airspace. The reality is that when that was first conceptualized, a lot of the navigational systems would have been really radar systems. But now those systems are satellite systems, although I do have to say that when aircraft pass over Barbados, even at that height, what they normally do is that they use the radar system to make sure that they're positioned correctly, and they look at the satellite system as well, and sometimes they adjust the times by a few minutes or seconds just to be sure that they're in the right position. So, but of course, The radar system is not now the number one system. The satellite system is really the systems that are being used. But I think that going the route of having the new civil aviation authority is very important, because very often we talk a lot about tourism, but we do not focus enough on the civil aviation aspect of the international transport as we should. And there are some opportunities there. I think that the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport is certainly they're embracing, and I think will prove to be beneficial and good for Barbados. So, Mr. President, with those very few words, I want to give my support to this piece of legislation. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Grant. Senator Adams.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, sir, on the face of it, this bill is fairly straightforward. It seeks to align the existing legislation with the intent, and the intent was laid out very eloquently and articulately, I thought, earlier by Senator Cummings. I'm going to overlap here a little bit in referring to that with Senator Franklin's questions about why are we doing this and who is going to get it. Well, Senator Cummings laid out the answers to both. You know, what we're really seeking to do here is retain ownership of a key asset that the country owns, but increase the value that we extract from it by seeking the best possible management for that asset that we can. And we've tried to do that through a procurement process, or RFP, I'm not sure what it's being called officially, that lays out very strict criteria, targets, obligations on those who eventually will be chosen to run this contract. And when I heard Senator Franklin say, oh, we're going to invite people in to lord it over us and make allusions to colonial times and even, I would say, infer the inferiority complex on our part, I thought to myself, it's not that. You know, these people are coming in here, they're going to work for us. This is our asset that we're bringing them in here to make money for us, to do the best that we can in a way that we haven't managed to extract in the past, the value we haven't managed to extract in the past. And all the while, whilst retaining ownership. It's a separation of ownership from management. And I believe it's going to be a good one. And I'd further add, I don't know who the 13 bidders are. It would be prejudicial, I think, to reveal that list, even if I did know. But the process was completely transparent. As the Minister of Transportation, and because she emphasized it, Minister of Tourism and International Transport emphasized. So if there was a consortium that was Barbadian or regional who wanted to be considered, they could easily actually do so. Now, sir, there's another aspect there that Senator Franklin raised, and I actually have a lot of sympathy for him on this one. When he talks about workers' rights, I think where we part company is that, as it happens, we're talking about a bill that carries the name of Sir Grantley Adams in it, and I've heard Senator Franklin on a previous occasion say that nobody did more for workers' rights and workers' protection than Sir Grantley Adams. And this is his party in government at the moment, and I don't think there could be a single person who parts from that ethos that we have to protect workers' rights. Well, there are two ways to look at this. We can embrace change, or we can be afraid of change. When what we're really seeking to do with this contract, this PPP, public-private partnership, is we contribute an asset. In exchange, we get some expertise and capital. That is the role, actually, of the IFC, the International Finance Corporation, which is an entity of the World Bank. They specialize in mobilizing private capital for this kind of project. And that is easier said than done. It is not easy to mobilize capital. It certainly is not. Capital, as has been said in here before, is one of three core drivers for growth. You know, the other two being increasing productivity and driving increases in employment. Now, capital, there's obviously an overlap in there. But I would say, if this PPP is successful, we're attracting capital, and it's actually going to create jobs. So we want, of course, as always, to protect the rights of workers. And I think, without trying to go through a list of how that's been done in a very, very difficult, best part of 2 years, COVID period, that this government's record would stand alongside any government in the world in terms of preserving jobs. But we also have to create jobs. And I was unaware of the plans to create an international transportation hub, a cargo hub that the minister spoke to. I actually sat here and started to get very excited at the prospect. It speaks, even within the tourism portfolio, it speaks to diversification of the economy that we really do require. Now, sir, we all know how important the tourist sector is. You know, if I paused a moment ago, it's because I didn't want to get these figures wrong. When I saw this bill was on the order paper, I actually thought we were going to get a different sort of criticism, not one on ownership or workers' rights or people coming in to lord it over us. I thought we might hear arguments around tourism as a net foreign exchange user, possibly, that it sucks away investment resources from other parts of the economy that could be developed for diversification. But we didn't hear that, and I think that's good, because those arguments are unproven at the moment. But what we do know, if we stick to facts, is that the tourist sector earns 50% of our foreign exchange. It employs about 15%, 12 to 15% of our workforce. And as a direct contributor to GDP, it's also around 15%. If you talk about all the ancillary services it generates, it could be as high as 40 or even 50%. So, although I'm a little bit sad I don't get to make the counter argument that I imagined I would, I'm still going to say we can't neglect tourism. We have to enhance it and make it even more of a driver than it is, and that requires investment. You know, I'll come on to a few metrics that compare us to others that really talk to the point of how important investment is. It could be in terms of hotel stock, making sure your hotel rooms are fresh, your attractions like Harrison Cave we've spoken to at some time, but also the physical stock of your airport. And indeed, even, and I want to spend a moment in a couple of minutes, even on this, even intra-island transportation, because really what we've been talking about here is international arrivals catering to that market, not so much about domestic arrivals from our neighboring islands. So even as we look at this bill, and even as there are certain levers that are within our power to improve, there are other things that are far more difficult to tackle. We can go through this process, and it's not an easy one, this PPP project. You know, Senator Franklin, in his remarks, and I say this most respectfully, talked about, you know, you could just send someone on a course for 6 months to do this kind of project. Most respectfully, I think that that's incorrect. I don't think that you can mobilize millions in private capital to improve one of the most important assets in your portfolio and sweat it more by sending a few fellas and ladies perhaps on a 6-month course to learn the ropes. That is not what's going to happen. So we can do our best, but let's really look at the reality of the situation when we're doing that. But there are some things that are a little beyond our control. So one of the things I don't think the minister could really have spoken about was intra-island transportation. The way we're set up at the moment, and this is one of the reasons I got excited when I heard about the hub and the cargo, the opportunities for cargo. But the way we're set up at the moment in this region is we compete very fiercely one against the other, island by island. We pay very heavy subsidies to airline companies to guarantee route and airlift into our territory. The figures I came across are a little bit dated, but they're from 2009, but I'm sure the situation hasn't changed that much. At that time, one of the World Bank entities solicited information on just how much was being paid to guarantee these routes, and it was about $50 million a year, and that was nine countries out of 35 who actually responded. So we are really competing hard against each other, and we see it in that we are more connected to the outside world than to each other. I'm sure there can't be a person here who hasn't had a situation where they want to go to another territory in the region. They have to go through Miami. They can't go direct. Even as Barbados was a LIAT hub, There's some destinations you couldn't easily go directly to. So that's a function of two things. The first is we're competing so hard and paying airlines to bring airlift to us. And the second is that we had two monopolies in the region, Liat and Caribbean Airlines, hubbed out of Trinidad and Tobago. And that has hurt us, I think, on intra-island trade and intra-island tourism, for sure. Now, this bill obviously doesn't speak to that directly, but in upgrading our facilities and in looking at parallel developments, especially with Liat, I think we all know some support has been withdrawn from Liat, and I think that's going to be a precursor to more competition coming in. And I would hate to see us repeat the era of the past where we virtually guaranteed a market to Liat. We saw high prices, not a great deal of reliability, and a fleet that in many cases was 20 years old. You know, we don't want that. And the protection they got absolutely stifled in the COT. Red Jet, for example, back in 2007, 2009. They didn't have a chance. This is not a situation that we want to see repeated. And if those things evolve as they might, the fact that we're making an investment like this in our airport maybe gives us even more opportunity than the minister so eloquently set out. Now, sir, I'm going to stray very slightly, not as far as Senator Franklin did, when he spoke about crime and punishment and the welcome stamp, and even less far than Senator Drakes did when we were talking about the liquor license. We managed to talk about coral reefs on that occasion. But here I do want to say just a little bit about some of the metrics that are out there that exist that show us we already have a good product, but there's room for improvement, and we should take hope from that. You know, I really enjoyed the contribution of Senator Greenidge when he spoke. You know, we sometimes we're just too hard on ourselves. I mean, you were a little more targeted than that, but I think you know what I mean. We sometimes we have to look at things and not be too rosy, but equally not be absolutely crushing in our assessment. So I found some data here that, first of all, again, I admit I prepared this because I anticipated a different set of responses, potentially contributions. But one of the things I looked at was the growth of Airbnb and VRBO, Verbo, and Home and Away in our market. That doesn't often get that much play in the media. I mean, we talk about the hotels and how tough it is and how they need to make capital improvements, and indeed the government is helping them to do that. But there have been in the past also comments about the concentration of hotel ownership. And I thought it interesting that in a very short period of time, people who put their properties on Airbnb and VRBO and so on, there are at least 4,000 of those properties in Barbados. And one number I saw suggested they earn about $4,000 US a year. So you're talking about $35–40 million that's coming in from a source that fundamentally changes the structure of our hotel stock. That's a thing that we can embrace. There has been some debate on whether it's harmful because of the extra load it brings on our infrastructure and whatnot. But it's also an opportunity, and it's one that deserves, I think, a little more attention than it's getting. But it's an area for improvement. And similarly, more traditional metrics that talk directly to the performance of the hotels. I mean, I noted three. This is not comprehensive. I'm sure Senator Grant knows a great deal more about the metrics, but things like the occupancy rates. The best in this region are around 79%. I think that's the British Virgin Islands. We're about 63%. How is it they're doing better than us? Average length of stay in Barbados is about 11 days, but just next door in St. Vincent, it's about 14 days. So obviously, the longer someone stays, the more money they spend. So both those examples have lessons for us, I think. And I've heard, I believe, Senator Grant make the point more than once in here that it's spend per tourist that's very important. We get about $1,700 from our tourists on the figures I saw. Somewhere like the U.S. Virgin Islands is getting $2,750 out of each and every tourist. So there are specific areas we know that we can improve in. And as it happens, all these things really get bound up in a category I'm going to call competitiveness. That's not just about tourism. And it's been said in here before, it's also about infrastructure, water, the ease of doing business, access to health care, and so on, things that affect every single citizen that we need to improve. They help us, and they also help our tourism product. And there are people who track and quantify that number, and Barbados is right on average, right in the middle, if you like, in arithmetical terms. We could do a lot better. So I look at this bill. I like the restructuring that we heard being described and outlined all this week, in fact, from Senator Cummings and also in here today. I like the announcement about the reduction by 50% of the regional air fees. I think that's one part of the answer to getting more into island trade and visits. And I shouldn't say I like, but I think what's happening with LEAC can have a really positive outcome for us in the medium and long term. All those things add up to this restructuring that we've heard many commentators talk about. And all these journeys start with one step. And this bill is one of those very first steps. I think it's a very important contribution to getting a far greater amount of capital expenditure from the private sector into our economy. And we know, anyone who's had an economics course knows, from capital expenditure comes growth in jobs, growth in productivity, expansion of the economy. So I think everybody should be pleased at what this potentially represents. We also are obliged as citizens to watch the process very carefully. It's been transparent so far, and I'm sure it will be right through to its conclusion. Sir, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Adams. Any further speakers? Senator Cummings.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I wish to thank the speakers who have made contributions to this debate, and I also wish to acknowledge the comments of Senator Franklin. But I want to start perhaps at the point that Senator Adams left off when he spoke about interregional travel as I close out this debate on this bill. Recently, I, like Senator Grant, had not left the island, probably the first time since I was around 18 years old. Longest time I've been on the island continuously since I was 18, since February 2020. But 2 weeks ago, I had to travel on government business. And it was my punishment or something that I ended up being the first minister to travel since the COVID-19 pandemic. And I had to go to Jamaica to a meeting, and I ended up having to go through New York in order to get to Jamaica. And the reason for that, Mr. President, was that Trinidad remained closed, its borders remained closed. CAL's primary hub out of Trinidad and Tobago was not yet operational, and only the secondary hub out of Barbados was functioning, which meant that we had 2 flights a week that would take us to Trinidad, to Jamaica, and outside of heading to either Miami or New York, there was no way for me to get there. So the importance of international airlift complemented by regional airlift cannot be sufficiently understated. But I digress in order to come to the point that I wanted to reach. Mr. President, I said earlier in my comments on the previous bill that I believe it was President Biden's town hall meeting earlier this week, he said that we were facing 2 pandemics, not just the pandemic of the unvaccinated that Senator Grant spoke about, but we were dealing with the pandemic of misinformation. And I fear, Mr. President, that from this place, oftentimes the leader of the opposition has presided over a pandemic of misinformation. And it is most unfortunate that we continue to do so at this time on these types of issues, Mr. President. And so I want to respond for the benefit of the public so that they do not walk away with the misinformation that continuously is peddled to their disadvantage, and that some who should know better continue to applaud. Mr. President, it was a public process, and I want to make this a document of the House because it was a public document at the time. The document that I'm going to read from, Mr. President, now is a pre-qualification document for the GAIA PPP. It was available online publicly. Anyone could have accessed it, and therefore I am comfortable making it a document of this House because I'm not going to be a victim or a co-conspirator in misinformation. Mr. President, this is a management transfer of management and assets, yes, but this has nothing to do with management skills and hiring young people who just came back from university or sending them on a 6-month course. Mr. President, if I were to read from the criteria, there were technical criteria, financial criteria, Mr. President, and it allowed us to figure out, to attract the bidders, and it set legal, technical, and financial criteria, Mr. President. I want to read from the technical criteria because if Senator Franklin is of the view and would wish to mislead the Barbadian public into thinking that this is about sending people on a 6-month course, I want to challenge you to see if this is what you think is what they think is required. Mr. President, under the technical criteria, the prospective bidder, or if the prospective bidder is a consortium, the airport operator member shall demonstrate that it currently operates on a standalone basis or as part of a joint venture or consortium, or that one of its affiliates operates on an active basis, landside and airside, at least one international airport of no less than 4 million passengers per year for the last 5 years continually. What 6-month training course are we talking about, Mr. President? The prospective bidder, or if the prospective bidder is a consortium, same as the above, shall demonstrate experience in the development, design, engineering, procurement, and construction of airport infrastructure construction projects during the past 10 years with an aggregate construction value of not less than USD $150 million allocated across a maximum of 3 airports. What 6-month training course are we talking about, Mr. President? I mean, I deliberately did not rise on a point of order because I wanted to demonstrate for the benefit of the public the kind of nonsense that sometimes comes from in here, perpetuating itself as information. Mr. President, the prospective bidder I read from...
Senator Cummins, I hate to interrupt you. I think, though, describing the... but by definition, according to standing orders, nonsense cannot emanate from the Honourable the Senate. I would not let any presiding officer allow that to happen.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I know that we can depend on your able leadership. Mr. President, we have a requirement of an aggregate value of $150 million, including financing one such project over a 10-year period, also in a minimum value of $70 million USD. Mr. President, and I could go on and on and on about the criteria established under the bidding process for a management contract. This has nothing to do with selling the airport. Mm-hmm. The government of Barbados remains the sole shareholder of 100% of the shares of the asset that we call Grand Island International Airport. What we are doing, however, Mr. President, even if it is called for the purposes of this bill, the transfer and management of assets, we are attracting an investor in the Grant Adams International Airport for the purpose of facilitating its expansion, its transformation, its upgrading, and as the first line in the bidder's invitation speaks to, Mr. President, creating new routes in partnership with the government of Barbados to expand the airlift capacity for Barbados, the country. Mr. President, this is what we are debating today and not that which was spoken about by my colleague on the other side. Now, I want to speak also about the Civil Aviation Department, which was raised, and the questions that were raised about why we are not a civil aviation, why we don't have Category 1. Mr. President, there's something under the International Civil Aviation Organization called critical elements. Those critical elements were reviewed last in 2019, Mr. President, when we determined that Barbados was not yet in a position to go into the next ICAO audit because we would not have met the requirements. Why was that, Mr. President? Because we had not yet complied with the majority. I think we have heard in the other place, the minister responsible for maritime affairs spoke about Barbados failing to comply with the International Maritime Organization, and equally so, we had issues with our compliance with International Civil Aviation Organization audits at the air safety level. Mr. President, in order for Barbados to attain Category 1 status, Barbados must have and promulgate a comprehensive and effective aviation law consistent with the size and complexity of the state's aviation activity, and so on and so on. Mr. President, That is the basis on which the Civil Aviation Authority and the legislation to which I referred to earlier is being drafted to facilitate the creation of a Civil Aviation Authority and all the critical elements that are contained in the ICAO standards and regulations for Category 1 that would then allow for Barbados to undertake the training, the simulation, the recruitment, the legislation, allowing for the management of the upper and lower airspace. I've heard people who have called in, Senator Greenidge spoke about people calling in on the call-in program, and someone drew to my attention recently that someone was making the assertion that Barbados had been for 30 years, but Senator Grant rightfully pointed out that it's even longer than 30 years, allowing PRCO International to collect fees for the use of the upper airspace. Mr. President, but I want to say here that without the introduction of an adequate civil aviation safety oversight system and monitoring mechanism through a civil aviation authority, Barbados could not have even taken that back if they wanted to, and they have tried over the years. It is a prerequisite for Barbados to have an effective civil aviation oversight system and the appropriate legislative macro framework governing that civil aviation system in order to attain Category 1. I do not want to continue with this oversimplification and this dismissive notion around complex matters, Mr. President. These are not things that you can wish away and minimize to the level we're talking about. Why we don't send somebody off on a 6-month training course, Mr. President, that's not what we're dealing with. And I suppose that the luxury of sitting in opposition and having nothing more to do than market one's union may not necessarily provide you with the opportunity to spend the time and immerse yourself in understanding the matters of which you speak. But do not attempt to superimpose that on the public of Barbados, who actually deserve better coming from this place. If we're standing to speak here, stand to speak on the basis of fact, truth, and knowledge. Otherwise, Mr. President, the regurgitated standard stock speech that we offer on every single subject, no matter what comes to the table, really needs to be retired. And young, bright people perhaps need to be brought to replace those speeches. With those words, Mr. President, I want to close on the question of Harson's Cave. Mr. President, Harson's Cave went out to bid. There were 6 companies that submitted bids on the management of Harson's Cave. Those bids were reviewed by a college of negotiators, not by any minister at the time. It wasn't me at the time, but my predecessor at the time. Predecessor did not evaluate those bids. There was a college of negotiators appointed to so do. 1 company emerged successful. They have subsequently taken over the management contract, and we signed that management contract with them in September of last year after I had joined the ministry. And I wish to say, Mr. President, that again, in keeping consistent with the point that I made about GAIA, that too is not just a management contract, but it is an investment contract. And we expect that within the first year of that contract, we will see an investment in Harson's Cave of $6 million USD in expansion. Harson's Cave that started out as just the cave, and I don't tell tales, I'm not telling tales out of school, because Chukka management and the new management of Harson's Cave has shared all of this detail publicly. They have taken their investment and converted Harson's Cave into a complete day-long attraction. There's going to be an infinity pool where you are able to just hang out and lounge by a swim-up bar. There is a bird aviary that has been created. There's a monkey experience where people can go and just observe what's happening in the gully, the beauty of the gully in St. Thomas. There is a zip line that is being put in and a floating bridge that takes you 30 feet up over the gully to walk and have that experience. But there's also a drop. I don't know quite what they call it. It's almost like a bungee jump, but it's not quite a bungee jump, but it allows you to, in a gravity-controlled environment, to just drop to the bottom of the gully, almost as if you're in a bungee jump type environment. Mr. President, $6 million. Every person who was working at Harson's Cave was severed, paid out in full. Their pensions, there were 3 persons, I think it was discussed before in the other place where this particular bill was discussed. There were 3 persons who were having difficulties with their pension because that was not a Harson's Cave issue or even a Chukka issue, but pensions, as you know, are managed by the Financial Services Commission, Mr. President. And so that process had to be completed. Persons were invited to reapply. Not all of the persons who were working at Harson's Cave did so, but of that amount, persons who were therefore qualified then came back into Harson's Cave, and you now have had a soft reopening of Harson's Cave, and you expect a full reopening of the attraction and the expanded attraction in October of this year. Mr. President, Harson's Cave has not been sold. Grantley Adams International Airport is not being sold. These are investment projects with people who have investment capacity and project capacity and expansion capacity that the government of Barbados does not have. Neither does a student with 6 months training courses would they have or be able to offer us either, Mr. President. This is about creating new opportunities and growth opportunities for Barbados, for our country, and for our sector. And with these few words, Mr. President, I wish to continue to commend my colleagues for the level of discourse and to urge that we guide these conversations on the basis of truth, fact, openness, and substantive debate, Mr. President, in the interest of all Barbadians. And with these few words, I commend this bill to this honourable chamber.
Thank you very much, Senator Cummins.
I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do now leave the chair and His Honour, the Deputy President of the House, assume the chair and this Senate be dissolved into committee.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. The Honourable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. President, Mr. Chair, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Your Honour do now report to His Honour the Chair that the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
Question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Grantley Adams International Airport Transfer of Management and Vesting of Assets Amendment Act 2021.
Is that the question is that this bill do not pass and be so cited. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 2, sir.
Order number 2.
In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Control of Inefficient Lighting Bill 2021.
Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise to introduce the Control of Inefficient Lighting Bill 2021, which intends to provide for the phased elimination for the importation, the sale, and the use of inefficient electrical lamps in Barbados. This effort, Mr. President, is consistent with the vision and the goals of Barbados's National Energy Policy 2019 to 2030 in regard to the energy efficiency and conservation, and as we endeavor to establish and maintain a sustainable energy sector inclusive of the consumption of energy resources in the most efficient ways possible. Sir, one of the goals of Barbados's national energy policy is an energy sector where consumption and production of energy resources occur with maximum level of efficiency possible. Sir, as this relates to lighting, many of us in here might be familiar and may have heard the word and the term used as it relates to lighting about the incandescent bulb. Sir, that bulb is around 142 years old. And our parents and our grandparents, and maybe some of us even in here might even remember using the incandescent bulbs, and in some places we still see them. But Mr. President, given Barbados's desire as well as the global need, now I wouldn't even call it a desire, Barbados's need and the global need for us to reduce our carbon emissions so that we can protect this planet that is ours and we can indeed preserve the environment that we live in. It is important, sir, that we seek to remove from the lighting landscape those elements that really create inefficiency that take us in the wrong direction towards protecting this planet. The incandescent bulbs are some of those types, and it is a significant part of what we're referring to, along with other types of lamps, which I will refer to later, that to which this policy and indeed this bill refers. Sir, many of you might remember these same incandescent bulbs. They got hot. They were very thin and they would break very easily. Those are the ones to which we're referring in case there are those who are thinking, what are they talking about? Sir, the successors, however, to that type of lighting were the compact fluorescent lamps, the CFLs, as well as the light emission diode bulbs, which is the LED. So you would see oftentimes these written on the packages, sir, and you know that they were the successors to that incandescent lighting product. Sir, these two use 60 to 90% less energy than the incandescent bulbs. And they have a lifespan, sir, that is approximately 3 to 25 times longer than the incandescent bulbs. And so, sir, if Barbados is to advance our efforts towards our largest sustainable energy program that would help us to reduce costs of energy to the country as well as to the individual citizens, to better manage the consumption of energy, how much, as well as how we consume it, to increase our energy security. And when I talk about energy security, I'm talking about access to clean and reliable and affordable energy, whether it is for cooking or for heating or for lighting or for communications or other type of productive uses. And if we are to mitigate the negative impacts, the negative effects of energy consumption on the environment, then, sir, we have to find ways to phase out not only products, but also habits and behaviors that stand in our way of doing so. A study, sir, which was conducted about 10 years ago in Barbados, it acknowledged that while most energy efficiency technologies are economically and commercially viable, the uptake of such have been slow in Barbados. And in the years since, there may have been some changes. However, we believe that there's significantly more that we can do. The same study, sir, it found that lighting accounts for about 21% of electricity consumed by households, approximately 29% in commercial and public facilities, and 6% in industrial facilities. Sir, same study also shared that energy efficient lighting could represent about 1/3 of the potential savings of electricity for residential, for commercial, and for public consumers. We thought, sir, that it would not be enough for us only to consider the studies, even though it's somewhat dated, but we do know that from some of the other research that has been done, not much has changed significantly. But we also recognize that in addition to the study findings, that we had to make, in making that effort to phase out inefficient lighting, that what we needed to do is to consider the impacts on households and the impact on business entities. And so, sir, just last year we had conversations with the Barbados Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which is a representative body of some importers and retailers of lighting. And in a letter sent to the ministry with responsibility for energy, sir, it indicated, the Barbados Chamber of Commerce indicated that if a decision is made to ban the importation of energy inefficient light bulbs, such should not result in a negative response from importers. Sir, they came to that conclusion after they had surveyed members. Some members had responded, and when they had gathered all of the information, that was the specific line that they placed in that. So we understood, therefore, that in considering the impacts on the business community, that indeed the Chamber of Commerce had indicated that from its members' perspective, certainly, that might not be significant. Importantly also, sir, we had to consider the impacts on households. We recognize, sir, that there are households in Barbados, including those from persons with lower income, that should they have to make that transition to change out their lighting, that there could be some significant impact on them. Sir, you will recall that under the Smart Energy Fund, financed by the Inter-American Development Bank, that indeed some households were provided, residential customers, everyday households, were provided with some type of assistance in order to change out their lights. And so, sir, the ministry responsible for energy will continue to ensure that there are options considered and assistance provided to households that may be significantly more impacted than others, simply because of that result. Sir, if I'm to flip back to the businesses, what was discovered also is that there are a number of products and a number of appliances we have in our homes that really and truly there is not an energy efficient alternative for. And you say, well, if there's not yet an alternative for those, what would we do with those? Sir, provisions are made here within this bill that we are considering for such things If you look, sir, at Schedule 1, the exempted electrical lamp, you will see, sir, that such items that relate to those kinds of bulbs in the airport runway lights, in automobile lights, in freezers, in heating equipment, in laboratory equipment, in lighting equipment for medical equipment, in microwaves, in ovens, in refrigerators, in stoves, some of those lights there is not yet an efficient replacement for them, and therefore this bill considers that in fact there may be a need for us to have some exemption, and indeed the bill provides for that, sir. If we look, Mr. President, at section 13.2, exemptions, this section grants the minister the authority by way of any order to exempt an electrical lamp from the provisions of the bill. And also, sir, if we look at section 14, exempted electrical lamp importers license, that there are those entities who, if they wish to import such things, they have the right to apply. The right to apply. And then, of course, consideration would be given to that application. And section 15, sir, in terms of the distribution license, this section also allows for persons desiring to manufacture and distribute to be able to acquire to apply for the necessary license, which would then be further considered. Mr. President, as I mentioned at the beginning, this bill speaks to the phasing out. And that phasing out is proposed over a 2-year period. And sir, if you look at section 12 of the bill, it lays out how the phasing out process over that period would in fact go. It suggests, sir, and I am going to summarize because it is a very long section, sir, that with effect from the 1st of January 2022, any electrical lamp which emits less than 15 lumens, that's how you measure, that is the measure used for the energy put out by that per watt, is deemed to be prohibited good, and with effect from that same day, no person shall manufacture, offer for sale, or sell any electrical lamp that is for local use, distribute for local retail purposes any electrical lamp which emits less than 15 lumens per watt. And sir, it goes on then to say that then with effect from the first day of January 2023, the same would apply. But again, this would now be for an electrical lamp which emits less than 25 lumens per watt. And it goes on then to say, as of the 1st of July 2022, again, sir, I am referring to section 12 of the bill. It looks then and says then that the same would apply for any electrical lamp which emits less than 40 lumens per watt. And it takes us all the way to January 2024, where the same would apply to electrical lamp which emits less than 55 lumens per watt. So we're getting more and more and more efficient at every stage in that process. Mr. President, much more can be said on this bill. However, I would like to conclude at this time, sir, because I believe that I have highlighted some of the critical parts. Of course, the Barbados National Standards Institute will be responsible for setting the minimum standards that would be permitted, the minimum standards for efficiency that should not be crossed by others and that comply with the requirements of this. There will indeed be some fines that are available, which are also laid out. And of course, there is an inspectorate that will also be a part of this that will help to monitor and see that there is compliance, etc. Sir, we believe, this government believes, sir, that this bill is good for the pockets in terms of cost savings. We believe that this bill is good for the environment, sir. Less energy consumed, it reduces our carbon footprint that is impacting climate change, pollution, and other negative impacts on the environment. We believe that this bill will have some long-term benefits for this country. We believe that this bill will have negligible impact on commercial entities as testified by the agency that represents them. And we believe that this bill will be good over the longer term, especially for our householders and ordinary citizens of Barbados. And it is with these few words, Mr. President, that I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator McConney. Senator Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I want to make a brief contribution to this bill, the Control of Inefficient Lighting Bill 2021. As usual with anything energy related, renewable energy related, energy efficiency related, Mr. President, the government usually has my support because on a day-to-day basis, I usually sit on the other side of the discourse where research is being done, studies are being put together, and I understand the argument for a lot of the legislation that comes as it relates to renewable energy and energy efficiency. And the acting leader of government business outlined very clearly why this type of legislation is necessary, why it is being done in a phased approach, because we have put a very, very lofty and ambitious goal for ourselves in moving towards being 100% renewable powered, or at least being carbon neutral by 2030. That is in a very short 9-year span. And at the moment, the renewable energy capacity as a percentage of the total capacity at the moment, I believe is just under 10%, which is a long way to go in the grand scheme of things. I believe in the next 2 to 3 years, albeit COVID, because the regulations have also been changed to increase the amount of capacity for those who hold renewable energy licenses. From, I believe the cap was at 1 megawatt, we moved to 10 megawatts of capacity, and for systems, for individual systems. And then also being now, it's brought to my attention that we've even gone up to 50 megawatts for land-based wind systems. So it seems that the regulatory environment is trying to move in a direction that we ramp up a lot of the renewable energy and clearly the energy efficiency with this bill today. Sir, it is also commendable, I think, to note that sometimes we talk about the lack of cohesion between research, policy, legislation, but I think this bill in particular shows a clear cohesion between the Barbados National Energy Policy, the amount of renewable energy studies and the energy efficient studies that have been done in Barbados for the last 10 to 15 years. And it is clear that the legislation in and of itself, as I read through it, as it relates to things like establishing standards, as it relates to labeling, the importation, the manufacturing, the sale of what we're trying to phase out as these inefficient energy lighting systems is in complete coherence with the Barbados National Energy Policy. So that is to be commended. Sir, what did concern me though is the fines, and I take this into consideration that this is the maximum, I believe, that a person can be fined, which is at the discretion of the law courts. $100,000 is the fine attached to a lot of these grievances within the legislation, or up to $100,000. I think that is a bit harsh, given that we don't want to create an environment where people feel as though the fines are discriminatory in relation to the exercise that we're trying to achieve. We want to make sure people have the right information, and we want to have an environment where they're more encouraged to make this transition as smoothly as possible. So that is one of the things. The only thing I should say that within the legislation was a bit of concern for me. I thought the fine was a bit high, $100,000 in all cases, actually. I don't think there's any kind of discrepancy in the legislation. I think all of the fines associated with contravention is up to $100,000. And in saying that, I would want to also say that one of the things that we would possibly have to do is tout our own, blow our own horn a bit more if we want to encourage people, and particularly as it relates to the energy division. I know they do a lot of work, and one of the things that they may have to do is to emphasize and disseminate the information a bit more as it relates to the incentives associated with energy efficiency and energy efficient systems, and the need for clearly greater promotion for that uptake to happen that we would want. There's an entire booklet online that has a host of incentives for persons who would want to either utilize, manufacture, go into business around energy efficient systems. For instance, the importation of LED bulbs has a duty of 5% as compared to fluorescent bulbs, that is 20% importation duty. There's also a $5,000 deduction against income for individuals who are purchasing environmentally friendly products, which are energy efficient products. Zero rating on value-added tax for energy efficient systems. Income tax holiday of up to 10 years for those who would want to get into the business of renewable energy and energy efficiency, obviously with the right applications and permissions granted. So for me, sir, I think one of the things that we'll have to really work on, in addition to, yes, passing the legislation, but really getting out into the public and letting the public know what is available to them that they can benefit from this transition that we're trying to make in terms of our energy systems. So clearly then, sir, if we are talking about the type of incentives and the benefits, particularly as it relates to businesses as well, there's the opportunity for increased business activity in that energy sector. And I want to also note that I had a personal experience recently with a small business dealing with solar water heating. And I have to say that there are a number of young entrepreneurs around Barbados who are setting up companies who by all means need the support of all Barbadians in terms of, because sometimes we have the inclination to go to, the persons who are established in the sector. But there are some businesses out there that, need the support of Barbadians, and I would encourage all of us, when we have the opportunity to do so, support a lot of those smaller manufacturers in St. George and so on. I don't know if the goodly reverend knows who I'm talking about, now that I've mentioned it, but a lot of small entrepreneurs who are moving into this space, and I really hope they know as well the type of incentives that are available to them, because that is all a part of what we call the green economy. Sometimes people think it's very esoteric, it's high level, it doesn't have a lot of impact, on the man on the ground. But once the technology is available, the service is available, I think there is growth that can happen within the energy sector as it relates to renewable energy and energy efficiency. Sir, I won't be long, and usually when I say I won't be long, I actually mean it. And the final point I want to end and close off with is the experience that we had recently with our electricity due to the passing of Hurricane Elsa. I think by and large, that was a lesson learned in terms of not just, we have to transition to renewable energy and more energy efficient systems, but there needs to be greater resilience within particularly our grid system. And I know there has been a lot of conversation about what should be done, how it should be done. People are talking now about putting cables underground. I'm not sure if the conversation about microgrids has been brought into the conversation in terms of building out the resilience within the distribution network. But what I want to say here is, to Barbadians, is this is going to be a learning process. The last 6 months living in this country has really allowed us to have the experience where we really understand what people talk about when they say external shocks. We have been tried and tested to the point where when I explain what has happened in this country for the last 6 months, they really think that I am joking. Because who goes through a pandemic to have to deal with a volcanic eruption, then deal with a freak storm, and then be hit by a Category 1 hurricane? I mean, it is something out of a science fiction at this point. And the fact that we still have our mental capacity intact, more or less, in some cases, it's just it's also just a testimony to resilience, even on the human level. So I think one of the things we have to do sometimes is take a breath. Take a breath. We need to take a breath as well. I know a lot of people were frustrated with the utility company. I understand their frustration. I went through some of the frustration. But what it can do for us is bring all ideas to the table, let all ideas contend, and let us come up with a system, an electrical system, a distribution network, ways in which people can also fortify their own household electrical systems in terms of renewable energy systems, what needs to be done for a greater uptake in that area, so that even if the grid is down, you're still able to have electricity. How do we make that process easier, cheaper, so that we build the resilience at the household level, at the grid level, and at the national level? So, sir, as I said, I wouldn't be long. I support the bill. I query the fines, or the maximum fine of that 100,000 Barbados dollars for for all of the contraventions actually in the bill. But outside of that, Mr. President, I think it is a good demonstration of where policy is coherent, and it really is a synergy between policy and the legislation that exists on the books in relation to a vision that the country has. Mr. President, I am obliged to you.
Thank you, Senator Drake. Senator Dr. Holder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I find myself in these debates following Senator Drake's more often than not, and I am particularly pleased, Mr. President, that we have congruence this afternoon. Unlike her colleague to her right, she's not saying the sky is falling. But we agree this evening, sir, that we have synergy between the research and the policy and legislation. I'm not so sure if she took a peek at my notes. We didn't sit at the lunch table together, so we had no discussion. But I must admit that some of the points raised, Mr. President, I do have here jotted down. So I will try not to belabor the chamber, and I will give a very short intervention this afternoon, and I do mean short. I do mean short, Mr. President, I do mean short. The acting leader of government business gave some context to the piece of legislation before us, and sought to couch it, if you will, within the national energy policy of Barbados, 2019 to 2030, and the fact that this is, in essence, a part of that overall strategy of the government. We heard 100% renewable energy and being a carbon neutral island state, at least by 2030 and so on. I took note as well, Mr. President, that this also helps us in our pursuit of the Sustainable Development Goals, because as we know, I believe it is Goal 7, that speaks to ensuring access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. So Goal 7 of the SDGs seeks to address this issue of being energy efficient. And therefore, I think that Barbados is well within the desired goals as an island state to contribute to those global objectives and global goals. I took note, though, in my research, that the Cabinet of 2011 had actually approved this particular policy, if you will, that there be a phase-out approach relative to the incandescent lights. We've had this type of lighting, light bulbs, for about 142 years, I'm told, based on the research. But the fact that the Cabinet then in 2011 understood the importance of phasing out the use of this particular bulb, I think is worthy of commendation. I'm quick, though, to take back that commendation, Mr. President, when I realized that having approved it in 2011, there was nothing done after that time to actually implement the policy that was approved by the Cabinet. I'm not so sure why, but I would think that we all understand and appreciate, given the research around the incandescent light bulb and the harm to the environment, that it was, a visionary move, the right move at the time to try to phase them out. But I'm not so sure what happened then. But this administration, for sure, has taken up the mandate to implement, Mr. President, this position, because we understand the value of it. The acting leader of government business spoke to the cost benefits to be derived from this piece of legislation. I want to, Mr. President, identify with the national energy policy and quote, if you would allow me to, sir, a couple of the objectives in that policy document. Because beyond the 2030 goals that were set, that energy policy also speaks to the provision of a framework for moving the island from a fossil fuel-based economy to one completely based on the renewable energy sources, as well as pursuing total annual energy savings of about $400 to $800 million. This is annually, sir, according to current market prices. So we're talking about fitting this particular piece of legislation and what it purports to do within that overall energy policy. And sir, if I go on, I came across, again, some other research done around 2016 or thereabout, based on a United Nations Development Program project, which included Barbados and several of the Eastern Caribbean states. And that particular body of work, sir, focus on a study of sustainable energy framework for Barbados and these OECS countries. And that particular report, I guess it gave me some comfort that from back then, significant work was done. That particular report, funded, as they said, by the UNDP, brought together these countries to look at training personnel and building capacity at the level of the country, at the level of the state, to assist Mr. President with this overall goal of having a sustainable energy framework for these countries. And so that project looked at things like energy efficient lighting technologies and ensuring that these technologies can be used by these member states, because the research says that these were some of the most viable energy efficient interventions available for countries. The report went on to show that energy efficient lighting measures are relatively low cost. I believe the acting leader of government business shared some of this with us. And that these measures are easy to implement compared to other energy efficient technologies. And so that particular work that was done then helped Mr. President help these countries, and especially the senior civil servants who would be required, I believe, to drive the implementation of these policies, to understand something as simple as how do you discard now the bulbs, the incandescent bulbs that remain after you have introduced the LEDs. And that report, I'm not so sure how many of us, Mr. President, are even aware that all this work was being done. That report showed that a lot of practical activities were actually introduced back then to identify suitable businesses and locations that can be used to help with the disposal of these bulbs. Now, Mr. President, you'll appreciate that will be a concern, I believe, for us as a country. Because if it is that we want to, yes, phase out the use of these bulbs over a period of time pursuant to the legislation, the question is, what do you do with them? What do you do with them? And obviously with the mercury that's in that particular type of bulb, it's not a simple case of just throwing it into our, domestic waste disposal system. So there must be a way of us disposing of these bulbs, and I am satisfied, Mr. President, when I read that report, that UNDP-sponsored project, that much was mentioned, much was said about the training and the capacity building that was provided to the various countries in that project to address this particular issue of disposal, so that we protect our environment at the end of the day, because this is what it's about, Mr. President. We all agree that we want to pursue the SDGs, and we want to make sure that we're able to protect our environment. So I would commend that to the Chamber as good reading. It is, as I said, it is referred to as the Caribbean Energy Efficiency Lighting Project. That's the title of it. It's a 2016 report, a UNDP report. But as I go on, again, recognizing, as I said before, that the research supports, Mr. President, the legislation and the policy that we are pursuing here. Again, I came across this document that was commissioned by the NGO organization here in Barbados that's involved in renewable energy, that particular association. And that report indicated that the power consuming sectors for the home, the top power consuming sectors for the home, or sections for the home, are the refrigerator, using about 45% energy, lighting, 21% of energy or electricity, the AC, 7%, and another 27%. So when you look at that data, Mr. President, lighting contributes some 21% of the electricity use of the home. Now that's a lot. That is significant. So you'll appreciate why this administration understood and demonstrated its commitment to this overall objective in bringing this legislation for us as this chamber to pass. Now, the data went on to show that with 21% of the household using, drawing on electricity, 21% going to electricity, that if we're able to put renewable energy sources in place, that a saving of 39% could be realized for the home. A saving of 39% could be realized, Mr. President, for the home. Now, this is significant, I think. This is significant, I think. We heard some data before about the information coming out of the Lighting Power relative to the usage of the number of kilowatts and so on being used by homes, commercial entities, and other public entities and so on. But I'm more focused at this point in time with the home, for the simple reason that in this environment where we know that we're still in recessionary conditions, we want to be able to encourage our homeowners as much as possible, Mr. President, to look at energy saving solutions to help at this point in time in keeping the cost down, being able to reduce the overall cost of electricity. And so removing this type of bulb and drawing on the LED, yes, we know that it's not only cost effective, but it lasts longer. The life cycle of it, produce the kind of cost saving that we want for the home. This, in my view, is a good effort, a right solution at this point in time in helping our consumers, helping the homeowner to save costs. And so my final thought, Mr. President, is around the point of the Smart Energy Project. And I may actually ask a question of us as we go forward. Because this Smart Energy Project, we're now in our second iteration of it. But the first one, implemented around 2011 to 2017, during that period, Mr. President, it had a particular component where it focused on energy efficient lighting distribution. And the actual project, Mr. President, included the promotion of energy efficient lighting by distributing approximately 57,000 LED lights free of cost to 11,000 persons, or about 10% of households in Barbados. That was an objective of Smart Energy 1. About 10% of households in Barbados would have received, Mr. President, these 57,000 LED bulbs. And the project went on to suggest that this represented rebates of about $1 million. And had we, as a country, achieved this, Barbados would have reduced its energy needs by up to 44 gigawatts, which is equivalent to reducing fossil fuels intake of about 26,000 barrels of oil, or US 1.3 million, over the life of the LED bulb. So, Mr. President, this was a commendable objective. My question, therefore, as I close, this was Smart Energy 1. Where is the data to indicate or to support that this objective was met? Was it met? Now, persons may hasten to suggest, well, this was the former administration. That is true. But as we know, government is a continuum. So we would want, Mr. President, to have a sense of the outcome for this, has this objective been realized? Were we able to assist 10% of households to change out their incandescent bulbs to the LED bulb, and therefore have placed now these 57,000 persons on a path of cost savings and obviously being able to improve our environment overall? And if it is that when we do the assessment, this is not the case, might I suggest that as we get ready to roll out Smart Energy 2, with this administration now that is even bringing this legislation here today, suggests to us that it may be a bit more visionary and a bit more committed to this objective, that we may want to consider, Mr. President, incorporating into Smart Energy 2 a component that would help us to assist households going forward, as was the remit, was the intention of Smart Energy 1. I would suggest that, Mr. President, that we consider in Smart Energy 2, if it is that the research will indicate that objective was not met in the former project in the early iteration, that we consider that as we go forward. Because at the end of the day, it is the overall objective, I believe, Mr. President, to be able to realize our energy goals, to be able to realize that sustainable development goal as we look at Agenda 2030. And as we work towards that, at the end of the day, it's about helping our country, yes, to be carbon neutral. It is relying on renewable energy solutions. We understand, we've seen the numbers, you're able to save cost, and more importantly, you're able to reduce the harmful effects on our economy, which is what this is really all about at the end of the day. So, Mr. President, I commend this piece of legislation and the amendment that is before us this afternoon. As Senator Boyce would often say, this is good legislation. This is good legislation, Mr. President. And I'm pleased that the opposition agrees. We have congruence, as I began my presentation in saying. And, well, you can only expect that, I believe, from this Barbados Labour Party administration. I'm obliged, sir.
Thank you, Senator Dr. Holder. Senator Greenwich.
It won't be long, Mr. President.
We've been warned.
Mr. President, I have to admit that this morning when I was trying to make some notes on this particular bill, I found that in about 3 to 5 minutes I was finished. And so that is at least the first inkling that you have that I'm not going to be too long. The piece of legislation that we're looking at, the control of inefficient lighting bill, when simply put, what we're doing is we're ridding ourselves of the soon-to-be outdated incandescent bulb, and we're replacing it with a much more efficient form of light bulb. Now, sir, I am no expert in the area, and indeed, I had a very simple and elementary way of what was incandescent and what was LED. I always thought that the light that gave that yellowish cast was the incandescent bulb, and the one with the whitish and brighter cast was the LED. And then the electrician did tell me that that is not all it is. And he went into a lot of technicalities about lumens and all different types of big words. But that is the way I always saw it. So we are phasing out the incandescent bulb by gradually disposing of it rather than by abruptly uprooting it like a bull in a china shop. We are not treating it that way at all according to this piece of legislation. Sir, from time to time and during the course of our lives, a need will arise for us to change from one product to another or from one form of a product to another. And as you would know, sir, there was a time in Barbados when our foreparents thought that asbestos was the best thing since sliced bread. And at that time, they did not realize, Mr. President, the negative and the deadly potential of asbestos. However, today, sir, the science tells us that for our own safety, we should rid ourselves of asbestos roofs and so on. And I think that plastic bags, not RPB, but plastic bags suffered a similar fate as well. And so there may be a variety of reasons why we legislate a change of product. And two of the major ones I do believe, sir, are health and economic. Health reason and economic reason. The health reason, sir, obviously would be one like the same asbestos. We make a change because it could be deadly. And as I said, there could also too be an economic reason. Sometimes there's a combination of both the health and the economic reason. And I do think that something like the plastic bag would fit into that category of both reasons. This incandescent bulb change, sir, I do believe is predominantly an economic change. Yes, as I said, sometimes change arises from sheer economic necessity. And this is a time, sir, when Barbadians need to be economically prudent and they need to save every cent. Now, we are using a lot more energy than before, and hence that attracts greater energy costs. For example, sir, our children are now glued to the technology in order to obtain some form of education. The days, sir, that you and I had of blackboard and easel and chalk, those days may very well be over. Slate. Now, even at my old age, sir, I have to quote when I'm going to court nowadays with something called Zoom. More energy costs. Something called Zoom. But the matter of fact, sir, is that it means that we have to make every effort to keep our energy costs as low as possible. We are not dealing here, sir, with Bajan pepper sauce. We are not dealing with Barbadian rum. We are dealing with something like an entrepreneur who has to import thousands and thousands of bulbs. And for that alone, there is a little dent in our foreign exchange. And we have to be as prudent as possible and try to keep these costs as low as we can. When I look at the legislation, sir, indeed section 12 to be exact, I realize, sir, that there's going to be restrictions placed on the importation of the incandescent bulb from January 2022. And then from the 1st of July 2023, these bulbs cannot be offered for sale in Barbados. And by the 31st of December 2023, the bulbs will be banned altogether. I look at those timelines given, and I came to my own conclusion. I heard Senator McConney speak about the involvement of the Chamber of Commerce and so on in the consultation. But the moment I saw that particular clause, and I looked at those particular deadlines, those timelines, I said to myself, it is evident that there was some consultation with the stakeholders. That alone sent that message to me. The timelines are extremely reasonable, and it is clear that it was done after much discussion and dialogue with those who have an interest in the sector. Because we know so that persons have to be rid of their stock. Maybe, sir, they will now have to switch suppliers. And what is happening here is that they're being given ample time to put their house in order. I think it is far more accommodating to treat them, sir, as part of the process rather than treat them as though they are the targets of the legislation. Mr. President, we simply could not look at a small businessman who purchases 300 bulbs and tell him in August that these bulbs will be banned in September. There has to be a decent period of phasing out. And not only that, another section that jumped at me was Section 8, where if the magistrate feels that the particular businessman still has certain things going past that expiry date, that the magistrate can issue a search warrant and he can send the inspector with or without the police to the business place. The person can enter the premises, can search the premises, and so on, and this man is charged. But, sir, a part that jumped at me is when the section says, but if within 30 days you do not bring that matter before the court, if proceedings are not commenced within a period of 30 days from the date of the seizure, then those things have to be returned to the owner. And when I read that, I said, this section, I believe that that particular businessman, that particular section, they had to be on board. And I believe that it is something which the business owners would have approved. You know, legislation cannot always be there for those who are using the hammer. We also have to think when we are drafting legislation about those who are using the shield. And I think that is precisely what is, and that is why I particularly liked this, and I particularly say that clearly the business people were on board with this particular section and with this legislation, because it is not what you do. Very often it's how you do it. And when bringing legislation like this, we cannot afford to be politically indifferent. We must always make an effort to avoid political disappointment among those who will be affected by the legislation. Yes, you can have good legislation, but we cannot be indifferent and callous about it. And I think, too, that the point is even better understood if I use another example of impending change where energy is concerned. I admit, though, that a change of bulb may be a more simple exercise than a change from one type of vehicle to another. But the approach to the relevant pieces of legislation should be no different. That is the involvement of those who will be affected. And it is always prudent to consult with those who will be directly affected by the legislation. Because without their involvement, the whole phasing out and the whole question of the time limit could prove to be extremely unrealistic. And it would be total madness, Mr. President, to look at Barbadians now and say to them that by year-end 2021, cars using diesel and cars using gasoline will be banned from Barbados. I believe, sir, that garages who sell new cars, I believe that businessmen who sell used cars, I believe that those who own gas stations, even those who work at gas stations, even those who drive cars, I believe that all those should be given an opportunity to be consulted, and because such a change could be deep and could very well affect the livelihoods, could very well take away profits and put people on the breadline. So here again is a situation where the consultation will be absolutely necessary. After all is said and done, Mr. President, the consumer will benefit from this measure too. But most of all, sir, government, as the primary consumer of energy in this country, will stand to benefit most. The measure is going to be extremely cost-effective to government. As you know, sir, government has a lot of offices, a lot of pavilions, a lot of schools, street lights, playing fields, courts, and by courts I mean hard courts and I mean law courts, health centers, public police stations, and so on. And all of them use lighting, use bulbs in some form or fashion. So the whole question as to who is going to benefit most from this piece of legislation is indeed a no-brainer. And government as an entity has to be conscious of energy-saving measures, and government must lead by example. No wonder, sir, that I believe now about 100% of our street lights have been changed to LED. If not 100%, very, very near to 100%. And I didn't know that it made such a difference. But I can tell you of a good friend of mine who every time he looked at the street light, which used to give the yellow cast, which would be the kind of incandescent type, every time he looked at that, his eyes ran water. He couldn't look up at all. He can now stare straight as the LED one, and nothing happens. It's almost like magic. So, at least that you can see, the difference there. Look at, I don't know. So, Mr. President, this is the type of change that is going to be done to the benefit of government, to the benefit of businesses and to the benefit of all Barbadians. I am not surprised, sir, and Senator Holder made it, but I'm not surprised at the position that Senator Drake took. I'm not surprised at that at all. Because if what I have heard is generally accepted as true, which is that the LED bulbs last longer, the LED lights are not as costly, the LED lights are brighter, the LED lights are more environmentally friendly. If all of that is true, then much is to be said about the overall intention of this legislation. Who can oppose it? Who can oppose it? Who can resist that type of change? There should be no divide whatsoever on this particular piece of legislation. It is not the type of debate, Mr. President, which should encourage a lot of argument and a lot of contention. And so I commend Senator Drake, and I commend this bit of legislation to the Honourable Senate. I'm obliged to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Greenwich. Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. I am very elated that there is consensus in this usually contentious honorable chamber, sir, on this particular bill. And Senator Drake spoke about the lofty and ambitious goal that we have. And the truth is, if we look at the work that has been done by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which happens to be the lead body for assessing the science related to climate change, you recognize that they have made it very clear to us, and our own experience have told us that we are in a climate crisis. That in fact, that the impacts will be irreversible on both people as well as our own physical environments. And I think when we recognize that this is the state in which we're in, and that we as small island developing states cannot sustain, and we will not survive more than a 1.5 degree change in the warming of the climate, it is at these kinds of times and these kinds of circumstances that we as a small island developing state, we do have to be ambitious, because it is in the interest of our own very survival. And so I'm glad, Senator Drake, that you acknowledge that we need to be ambitious, but we need to be ambitious in our own interests, because as we can see from the commitments, or lack of commitments, I should say, from some of the larger industrial countries as it relates to climate change, we really and truly are dependent on them to do what they have to do in order to save our lives. But that does not absolve us in any way from us being able to do what we have to do ourselves in order, yes, thank you, in order to do so. I also acknowledge that there is need for greater support of emerging businesses, smaller businesses, those that are not the tried and proven. But this government has committed that indeed we will seek to be able to engage smaller businesses in a number of other areas. And of course, energy is no stranger, or is not to be exempted from that in any significant way. There was much more that Senator Drake said, but quite frankly, I just want to thank her for the support that she has, that the opposition indeed, through her, has been able to give to this particular debate. Senator Holder, just as Senator Drake did, was very careful in identifying the fact that research linked to policy, linked to legislation, is a significant feature that we see here. And this is certainly the direction that this government intends to take, where we use evidence-based science to be able to inform our policy, and also to be able to inform the legislation that, once implemented, will give us the kinds of results that we want and that are envisioned in our national energy policy. Sir, I am also wish to speak to Senator Holder also spoke about the disposal of bulbs and the need for us to have greater public education. And I wish to indicate that the Cabinet did in fact approve for the Ministry with responsibility for energy to embark on appropriate public education program as a part of this, and we look forward in the passing of this bill to see the ministry responsible for energy to continue to do that. And Senator Greenidge spoke about having come a distance himself and having to understand what an incandescent bulb is and also what his role as a citizen is in terms of helping us to be able to reach the goals that we have. And I think it is that same level of educating ourselves and getting to understand and to know from the people around us what it is that we need to do in order to be able to help save this climate, help save this country, and to be able to move towards the vision we have for sustainable energy in this place. He also spoke about stakeholder consultations and collaboration to meet the timelines. And indeed, we have always said as a government that whatever we do, it is a whole of country, not just a whole of government approach to the initiatives such as these. And I assure you that the ministry responsible for energy is seeking to collaborate and work across all sectors, including civil society, in order to get this done. Mr. President, it is with these few words and with thanks for the contributions of all these honorable senators that I beg to move that this bill be again read a second time.
Thank you, Senator McConney. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that your honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair. The Honourable Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Part 1, clauses 1 and 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 and 2 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 3 through 8.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 3 through 8 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 3 to 8 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 9 to 11.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 9, 10, and 11 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 9 to 11 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 12 to 17.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 12 to 17 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 12 to 17 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 18 to 20.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 18 to 20 stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 18 to 20 stand part. Honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in committee. All honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be now read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Control of Inefficient Lighting Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do now pass and be so cited. Those honourable senators in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. This bill is now so passed and so cited.
Order number 3, sir.
Order number 3.
In the name of the Honourable Acting Leader of the Senate, to move the second reading of the Needham's Point Holdings Limited Exchange and Issue of Bonds Bill 2021.
Senator McConney.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, Mr. President, we have heard in this honorable chamber today, and we have certainly heard over the last year, that COVID has had many impacts. Among those impacts have been the capacity of everyday people to work and to earn. And also those impacts have been on the capacity of business entities to earn and to turn a profit and to pay their bills and to service their debt at a rate that they had anticipated pre-COVID. Sir, the purpose of the Needham's Point Holdings Limited Exchange and Issues of Bonds Bill 2021, which, as its name suggests, is specific to the Needham's Point Holdings Limited. It provides, sir, for the exchange of bonds issued by Needham's Point Holdings Limited and to exchange those for the issuance of Series B bonds by the government of Barbados to bondholders, and that there be a cancellation of full outstanding amount of other bonds. Sir, this situation has been brought about in large part by a number of the shocks that this country and this economy, and certainly the tourism industry, has sustained over a certain period, certainly over the last couple years. In January of 2011, if I can give a little bit of a background, Mr. President, to raise 80 million Barbados dollars for the purpose of financing the Hilton Barbados Hotel, the Needham's Point Holdings Limited, they issued a 10-year Barbados 80 million bond with a fixed rate of 6.7%. Sir, there were other conditions such as semi-annual terms, such as semi-annual interest payments, and it was due to mature in January of 2021. But sir, this bond was guaranteed by the government of Barbados at the time. During the 2018 domestic debt restructuring, this facility and other Needham's Point Holdings Limited debt, it was excluded, sir. And we now come to a point where we recognize that the restructuring of this debt, given the impacts of COVID and other stresses on the economy, have certainly required that the restructuring of this debt owed by the Needham's Point Holdings Limited, that this is now necessary. One, hotel occupancy rates fell to record lows. The company's revenues from the Hilton Hotel were severely impacted over the last while. This undermined Needham's Point Holdings Limited's ability to refinance the 80 million Barbados dollar bond and to repay its bank loans on schedule. Now, the company's financial situation, Mr. President, was also compounded by a lack of a cash injection by the Hilton Hotel to fund operations. As you know, again, as I said, we had the shocks that impacted us unexpectedly. And also, the financial situation was impacted by bank lenders denying a request to utilize a cash reserve which was pledged as security. Further, in addition, as a result of the company's financial difficulties, a locally operating bank, I will not use the name at this point in time, withdrew its offer to refinance the bond. Good news, sir, is that other commercial debt of the Needham's Point Holdings Limited, they were successfully renegotiated. In August last year, there was a meeting held with Needham's Point Holdings Limited and its bondholders, and at that time a request was made, sir, for an extension of the maturity of that previous bond, which I mentioned, which would have been issued in 2011, I believe, at that point in time. And that request was for there to be a reduction in interest rate as well, from that fixed rate I mentioned earlier to about 4.7%. And sir, unfortunately, that attempt failed to earn the 75% majority that is required to pass and bind all bondholders. Subsequently, sir, in February, in fact, earlier this year, our Ministry of Finance, Economic Affairs and Investment sought to seek to bring about some resolution to this matter and be able to put Needham's Point Holdings Limited back on a healthy footing. And in fact, we were the ministry was able to negotiate a compromise. That compromise, sir, was to have the government of Barbados issue Series B bonds to the bond holders. And this addressed, and why that is because it addressed the bondholders' concern, given the financial situation of Needham's Point Holdings Limited, to ensure that the terms of repayment of the debt would be on a sustainable basis, and they were satisfied that with the issuance of this Series B bond by the government of Barbados, that it would satisfy their concerns and indeed provide that sustainable payment. Sir, in April, 82% of the bondholders agreed to a resolution that would allow this compromise that was effected to then go forward, and that the restructuring of the debt would then go forward, and it would be binding to all shareholders. The terms of the series bonds in this very short bill, Mr. President, you will notice that it is in the schedule to this very short bill. It is very detailed in terms of the structure and the interest rates, etc., sir. In the interest of this honorable chamber, I may not go through all of the detail unless this honorable chamber will so desire, but it is indeed in the schedule to the very short bill that we are discussing. Sir, we have been assured by our ministry responsible for finance that the issuance of these Series B bonds will not significantly and negatively impact Barbados' debt situation. And that, of course, will be something that I believe we are happy to hear. It will come to approximately a Barbados 83.75 million, will increase government's debt by approximately that, which was at the time that the assessment made close to about just over 1% of the gross domestic product. Now, sir, under the Debt Holder Approval of Debt Restructuring Act 2018-24, it was noted that the Needham's Point Holdings Limited 80 million bond was to be reprofiled, or it would have been exchanged for Series D bonds. And so we accept, sir, that with this compromise of Series B, that we will also need to bring back some adjustment that may have to be made at that point in time to that particular type of legislation. Sir, this is a simple situation where we had anticipated performance at a particular time, pre-COVID, and pre-much of the impact that it had. We have seen how the impacts of COVID had impacted the tourism industry, and certainly Needham's Point and our Hilton Hotel were all part of those impacts, and as a result, it makes sense at this time that we restructure debt. The truth is, for those who will say, well, why restructure it, and why is, well, of course, government guaranteed the bonds in the first place, and we really and truly have a choice right now. Are we going to do what Senator Adams have called sometimes a fire sale, or do we seek to restructure the debt and be able to keep this asset for Barbados and be able to, as again Senator Adams said in the previous discussions that we had, to be able to not gamble really, but take a chance on ourselves and be able to say that there will be recovery. And at that time, we want to have that asset intact and in good financial condition to be able to bring the benefits to Barbados that we truly need it to have. And it is with these few words, Mr. President, that I beg to move that this bill be now read a second time.
Thank you, Senator McConnell. Senator Drakes.
Thank you, Mr. President. This bill that is before the House, the Needham's Point Holding Limited Exchange and Issue of Bonds Act 2021, sir, generally for me speaks to the level of uncertainty that is occurring not just in Barbados, in our economic environment, but globally. And the fact that in 2018, when the government sought to restructure the debt, there was no need at the time to include this set of bonds, but yet in 2021, we clearly see that there is a need to do so. Speaks to how quickly things are changing in our environment, with COVID anchoring a lot of the change that we're seeing. And sir, one thing though that strikes me is that even before COVID, what I would say is the issuance of bonds and restructuring has been somewhat of an economic hallmark for government. It has been a go-to kind of policy tool to manage the economy. And in order for us to deal with our debt situation that we had in 2017, 2016, where we were somewhat on a precipice, some would say, and now that COVID has compounded a lot of the things that are happening to our macroeconomic indicators, we see the government issuing bonds again. Sir, one of the things I want to highlight though is, and the acting leader of government business noted it just now, is the use of policy is based sometimes on your ability to forecast, to anticipate, And we're living in an environment where that is becoming increasingly difficult or sometimes even impossible. When we first restructured our national debt in 2018, for 2021, we would have been assuming we were almost near to the land of honey and milk. We thought by now we would have been recovering and things would have been well in the land. Unfortunately, due to a global pandemic, we are finding ourselves even now in more of a constrained situation when it comes to our ability to earn and the amount of economic activity that can happen across the nation. And I say that to kind of highlight possibly our lack of ability to have greater foresighting ability, not forecasting, but foresighting ability. Because sometimes it is not that you want to have necessarily a solid prediction of what is going to happen, but you can be informed or have informed policymaking by looking at what are the probable things that can happen, formulating certain scenarios, and coming up with a policy that is robust enough that it covers a lot of the scenarios that you've extracted from that foresighting exercise. But sir, essentially, as the acting leader of government business has stated, that the issuance of these bonds is to cancel the lump sum payment that was due to these bondholders and establishing a new arrangement stretching out the interest and the principal payments for these new Series B bonds with a maturity of up to 15 years in the longest instance. The bonds are also like the bonds that were issued for the national restructuring, subject to the natural disaster clause as well. In the case of an earthquake, tropical cyclone, excess rainfall, anything that triggers the CRIF, which is the Caribbean Catastrophe Risk Insurance Facility parametric insurance at the national level. Sir, this debt service would be suspended and deferred as needed. But sir, one of the things that is clear is, as I said, we're in this precarious situation where with our debt profile and the level of uncertainty that we are finding now, particularly as we try to recover within the COVID or post-COVID context, it is clear that we're almost reaching, or we're in a place of severe vulnerability. And I say that because when in 2020, we did not know what we were up against. So most of the world was somewhat at a standstill. And we were talking about V-shaped recovery, W recoveries. One of the honorable members on the other side, him and I had a conversation about, will it be worse than the 2008 crisis? We just did not know what we were up against. And now that we are in a situation where the economy and the global economy is recovering at a slow pace and it's differentiated across countries, it's almost as though, or I'll give the analogy, it's like you've gotten into a car accident, you've lost complete use of your legs, and you're at physiotherapy, and any small incident that happens to you while you're in physio can set you right back or worse while you're trying to recover. And that's why I say we're almost in an extremely vulnerable state right now, given where we are in this COVID environment. And sir, this is something that even in the June 2021 fifth review under the extended arrangement and requests for waiver of non-observance of performance criterion and modification of performance criteria, IMF report that was just concluded. And that IMF document states that while the policy responses to the pandemic have been appropriate, necessary even in some cases, short-term fiscal accommodation will need to be compensated as soon as the crisis wanes to preserve that sustainability in Barbados. And if you look at, if you listen and you try to interpret that language, it is clearly saying that the leeway that we've given ourselves has to be compensated in the medium term for us to get back to the point where we're on that trajectory to what the government's objective is, 60% debt to GDP ratio in the long run. But what jumped out at me in that sentence is, as soon as the crisis wanes, we have no idea when that is. We are assuming now in this present dispensation of life that the crisis is waning, but we really don't know with 100% certainty that that is so. When the pandemic first started, we were talking about flattening the curve, 2 weeks, 18 months later, sir. We are still here uncertain of what even the short-term future holds. And we saw how quickly we had to adjust, even in terms of some of the targets, when we had to reduce the primary balance from 6% of GDP down to 2%, down to 0%. So all of these changes are happening rapidly, and our ability to anticipate the change in our environment, as I said, is becoming increasingly difficult. Sir, but that IMF fifth review also had another comment that I'd like to read out to the chamber. It says, the temporary deterioration in the primary balance financed by large external debt from international financial institutions, along with the collapse of GDP, has interrupted a steady decline in the public debt to GDP ratio. Even with this delay, the authorities will need to sustain demanding medium and long-term primary surpluses to preserve that sustainability. So when I read that, it means clearly then that the government will have to go through a period where there will have to be, I don't want to use inflammatory terms, but there will have to be a period where we prioritize fiscal consolidation, and that means tightening the belt. So we're going to have to juggle a period where, coming out of such a recessionary period, we're going to have to constrict the amount of expenditure for things like possibly social services if we want to maintain the debt sustainability. And that will be a very precarious situation, because when we're talking about the recovery, there's also still the possibility that the recovery can be sluggish. Because after having 17% of our GDP knocked out in 1 year, having an increase of GDP of 2 and 3% per annum means that it's going to take us a very long time to get back to where we were pre-COVID. So it then begs the question, how are we going to prioritize and rationalize the resources that we have if we're going to maintain our debt sustainability and still keep the standard of the type of social support that the government provides for the Barbadian public? Sir, the debt to GDP ratio at the end of March 2021 was 152%. In a very layman way, for every dollar that we have or earn in economic activity, we owe somebody $1.52. I don't know how else to kind of make that more simple. But that is the reality that we have at the moment. And the fundamental argument will still be, how do we pay off that $1.52, given we only have $1? So we need then, in some way, to find new engines of economic growth. Sir, we spoke this morning a lot about tourism-related matters, given the bills that were being debated. And one of the things, particularly as it relates to the ownership of a hotel and being state-run and understanding how do we manage this crisis and target or utilize to the best of our abilities the infrastructure around tourism. And the point was raised this morning, and I want to reiterate it and support it, is how do we increase the amount of money that visitors spend in Barbados? The Caribbean Tourism Organization report stated in 2018 that visitors spent 9.7% more in that year compared to 2017. And that increase in visitor spend was actually contributed to the increase in visitor arrivals at the time, as well as a 7.1 increase in the average daily spend from US $170 to $182. But that is in the context that overall in the Caribbean, according to a CDB report, Mr. President, that annually in the Caribbean, Barbados included, and I'll tell you why, the average annual spend per visitor since 1989 has moved from US $870, and this is dated information now, to 2014 to US $608. And this is because there was a large shift from long-stay visitors to cruise ship visitors. So we all know that because cruise ship visitors are only here for a day, they spend a lot less money. But the emphasis was on bringing a lot of persons to the islands through the cruise travel. And because that sector, or that part of the tourism sector, was so badly hit by COVID, we really have to find new ways of not just getting people to Barbados, but how do we extract as much value as possible from those visitors to increase the amount of money that they spend. So, sir, in the case of the Hilton Hotel, and don't worry, I'm not straying, it is more of an integrative contribution, sir, bringing things together to make a point. In the case of the Hilton Hotel, Mr. President, the policy decision to restructure the debt, I'm assuming, is based on the assumption that tourism will return in a way that Needham's Point Holding can be a viable entity. And that is why when I first started, I talked about forecasting versus foresighting. And if all possibilities were to be put on the table, my question then would be, if tourism does not return in the way that we expect it, or there's a lot of volatility within the sector where we have, these high peak periods in the winter season, but then there's a complete drop-off then in the summer months, which is usual for the tourism industry, but there's more of a larger drop-off than usual. If there's more volatility and still not reaching the levels that we had pre-COVID, are we still then going to say it is financially prudent to have restructured the debt? If in another year or 2 or 3, we don't have the revenues to support something like the debt restructuring for the Hilton Hotel. And I'm not saying have a fire sale, but I'm asking, is the policy choice robust across the majority of possible scenarios that can possibly play out in the short to medium term? And sir, one of the things that is going to be essential is understanding the financial viability, obviously, of the operations. And in preparing for the debate, I did a little digging, a little researching as usual, and I came across an article by a member who now resides in the other place, who now holds a ministerial portfolio. And the questions that he asked in 2016 are still very much relevant today, or even more so, given the COVID environment. The title of that article, Mr. President, was Needham's Point in Pickle 2. And he posed the question of, is the owner's return sufficient to satisfy the debt service when at the point in time the government wanted to loan the Hilton operations $10 million. And he went on to talk about the need for hotels, and the honorable member on the other side spoke about this as well this morning, Senator Grant, talked about the need to have about 4% of your revenues allocated for things like CAPEX costs, making sure that rooms are up to standard, and all of these things. And if we kind of take that approach where we take the operational side of it into account, given the protracted revenues that are expected in the short run, we then still ask the question that the Honourable Minister for the Ministry of Transport and Works and Water Resources asked in 2016, are the owners' returns sufficient to satisfy the debt service? And the acting leader of government business mentioned briefly about, being able to negotiate the loans from commercial banks. But what would be good is for the government to, and I don't know if it has been shared with the public, but to give us a full profile of what the debt is at for Needham's Point Holding Limited. And if it is possible to share what are the projected revenues for the next couple of years, given that we are committing ourselves to restructuring this $80 million. And I know that the government backed the bonds when they were issued, and it is the government's responsibility. But so that we can have a fuller conversation about what is happening with that asset. And maybe there's another recourse that happens if there's a need for other interventions to occur if the scenario that we're assuming, which is the return of tourism pre-COVID, does not, Mr. President, occur. Sir, what I also want to state quickly is that these bonds are being restructured almost identical to the bonds that were restructured in the National Restructuring Program. And one of the things that struck me when I was reviewing the Auditor General report was the lack of documentation, the crossing of T's and the dotting of I's when it comes to making sure that everything is above board with these transfer of bonds. And I want to state here and know for the record that I hope that these bonds are done in a tidy manner and that the proper recording of this transfer is done, because in the Auditor General report we had issues where he could not validate documentation, and that led to questioning things like inaccuracy of the actual valuation as it relates to, let's say, British American Insurance Company, the issuance of $101.7 million in bond support in new investment. He queried the absence of supporting documentation for that. Sir, for the Series A amortization bond totaling $74.8 million as a part of the domestic debt restructuring, He said there was a lack of written instruction, and it made it difficult to verify the authorization of the issuance. And I'm just saying, for the record, Mr. President, given that clearly the bondholders are making sure that they are compensated in a way that this process ensures that they receive what is rightfully theirs, I am hoping that administratively on the back end, these types of issues that were highlighted in the Auditor General report for other transfers in bonds does not happen with these bonds under the Needham's Point Holding Limited. Sir, in closing, I'll say this, and this is probably going to be a very biased closing remark. I thought that we missed an opportunity here as well. When the bonds were debated, or when this bill was debated in the other place.
Excuse me, Mr. President, sir. As the honourable member is making reference to an Auditor General's report, could you please ask for I would like to ask for clarification on which Auditor General report for which years is she referring to?
Senator Drix, please confirm.
Yes, sir, that is the 2020 report, Mr. President. My apologies for not stating the year that I was referencing. As I was saying, sir, I think we missed an opportunity to be visionary, given that this is a state-owned operation, which is then managed by Hilton, of course. But I thought we missed the opportunity to build in what we talked about earlier. And that is some level of, and if possible, in the negotiations with the bondholders, is to build in some type of sustainability criteria in this restructuring. So in addition to restructuring, it would have been a redesign of the bonds, Mr. President. So sustainability criteria like the things like renewable energy for the operations, wastewater treatment, Mr. President, the promoting of biodiversity within and the surrounding areas, and then things like the inclusive framework for workers' rights and dignity. Because what is clear is the way in which we've done things before needs to change. It has to change, given that there's a lot of pressure for us now as a small island developing state, I believe, to be vanguards in this sustainability mission and sustainable development. And sir, part of this restructuring, I believe, I don't know if it was possible, but I believe a portion of this debt could have been committed to some type of conservation or regeneration efforts, given the natural beauty that is surrounded in the Needham's Point area. You have the Carlisle Bear area, just, what would that be? Just north. And the long stretch of beachland that is to the southeast, where you have a lot of coastal vegetation. And I believe, sir, that based on just the natural beauty that enhances the experience of the hotel, part of that restructuring could have gone to the increase in including things like natural capital, social capital, because what has also come out of the pandemic is clearly there were a lot of labor relation issues that needed to be dealt with in a more humane manner. And if now, going forward, the Hilton Hotel, through the ownership of Needham's Point Holding, could have been a best practice example of where the tourism industry is going in Barbados, it could have been a beacon or a representation of sustainable tourism. And I thought that, for me, it was a missed opportunity in articulating that kind of vision in an example that is clearly outlined in the operations of the Hilton Hotel. And sir, the pronouncement of something like the Hilton Hotel being the first luxury regenerative hotel. And people who are in the area of sustainability would know that regeneration not just means being eco-friendly, but you actively work towards enhancing the natural biodiversity that is within the environments that you are working in. So it is not a case of, yes, I will put energy, solar panels on the building because it's cost effective, because that's still a very much a financially driven motivation. But things like, what are the natural vegetation that is around my area? How can I include that in the visitor experience as I enhance my natural capital as well as my financial bottom line, where you then become truly a triple bottom line approach to the operations of the Hilton Hotel. So, sir, for me, I thought that when I thought about the situation, and, you know, we're now talking about having a blue economy, Mr. President, and the need for a more sustainable, and I also include the word regenerative tourism product, because at the end of the day, tourism is also a very extractive, it is natural resource intensive, and it is an extractive industry. The amount of energy that the tourism industry demands, the amount of water resources it demands, and as well as the amount of waste and the impact that it has in the nearshore environment, deems it to be a very extractive industry. And what we want is a regenerative industry. And I thought through the restructuring exercise, we could have redesigned the bond instruments to even blue bonds, where a portion, as I said, a portion of these funds could have been preserved or set aside for natural conservation, preservation, and regeneration activities, along with, because sometimes we forget that part of it, along with making sure that there is a environment that is conducive to workers' well-being. And how do we put that into practice in an example like the Hilton Hotel in Barbados? And sir, for me, that would have given us what I would have called some kind of beacon of demonstration that we are moving in a different direction. And it would have signaled to all of the other persons operating in the industry, the business pre-COVID has passed, and we're now charting a new direction, and this is what that direction looks like. So, sir, I hope that my integrative contribution was insightful, and I don't believe I have to support the bill, because I believe that the first payment to some of these bondholders was June 30th, which has passed. I stand corrected on that, but I believe that some of the payments have already been started, and that was through a resolution that was passed in the other house. But nonetheless, sir, I understand, and I want to end and say this. I understand the difficulty of working in this environment. I will not stand here and say that that one person has all of the answers. But I am hoping that my contributions, particularly in this environment now that we have in Barbados, can be insightful and instructive enough to start a different conversation as it relates to policy and legislative issues, Mr. President. And with that, I am much obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Drakes. Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. President. Again, I give the Senate the assurance that I'm going to be short in my contribution. I wanted to, in this debate, give my support to the bill and to speak to a couple of the things that Senator Drakes would have referenced. And while I think many of those things are important, the concern that I have, Senator Drix, is that I am not sure, and just listening to you and hearing this for the first time, I am not sure that the best approach is to have this within the bond structure. I'm not of the opinion that that is the best way to approach this. I can tell you that the matters that you raised about conservation and making sure that there's sustainable development and to look at greening and all of those many issues, that those matters are indeed being addressed. They're being led by the Ministry of Tourism and International Transport. In fact, we have had quite a number of meetings with different stakeholder entities involving Invest Barbados, the Ministry of Tourism, the BHDA, in collaboration with the IDB, specifically looking at these types of issues, because we understand that these types of issues are very critical and important in this environment. So I would not want the impression to be given that the government of Barbados is not cognizant of the need, particularly in an environment such as this, to look at these critically important issues. And I wanted to give the Chamber the assurance that they are in fact being looked at, because the environment in which we are in is one that is extremely challenging. Sir, you know, I stood in this chamber when we were debating the appropriation bill. And, you know, before, there was a certain degree of certainty that I had in terms of how the industry was likely to perform. The truth is that in today's environment, that certainty is not there. Things can change overnight. And we have to look at this industry from a different perspective. And I do agree that the elements raised by Senator Drix are important. And they are being given the attention. But I'm somewhat challenged, Senator Drix, in seeing how to apply what you have said really to the aspect of the bonds, because I see that fundamentally different to the perspective of the policy position that is put in place for the sustainable development of this very important industry. I'm not in any way, sir, saying that what Senator Drix has communicated, my good friend Senator Drix has communicated to this chamber is not relevant. What I am saying, though, is that from where I sit, I think that it is good policy discussion to be pursued.
Senator Drix, now what do you
Just
recommend?
on a point of elucidation, sir.
Okay.
Just for the clarification and to possibly enlighten my good honorable colleague on the other side, what I was referring to is what people call blue bonds, and a portion of and this is usually done at the national level, and it would have been an innovative initiative to do it at the organizational level. And that is probably where it wasn't very clear, where a portion of the debt is placed into a trust for conservation and regeneration activities and so on. So it's usually done at the national level, and it's something also that the government has been looking into, and I take that point, but I was talking about it as from an innovative tool where we then downscale that at the organizational level in this exercise. So I just wanted to make that interjection, but please.
Thank you, Senator Drix. Appreciate it. Senator Grant.
So, Senator Drix, I thank you for that clarification. I do have to say that it does not change my perspective and my opinion. And I do believe that it is important that we have a strong policy coming out of the Ministry of Tourism that speaks to those types of issues, not in any way minimizing what you have said. So I just wanted to give the Chamber the assurance that these are matters that are being looked at. The truth is that we have a responsibility to ensure that we don't only talk about the development of the industry today, but we have to speak to the sustainable development of the industry and to ensure that we are able to have it functioning for future generations. I've heard during the COVID-19 pandemic, sir, persons saying that we should not rely on tourism alone, and you have to diversify and you go and look at other areas. And this is 18 months, sir, that I've been listening, but I can't hear them telling me specifically where to look in such a way that we can see the level of contribution to the gross domestic product, the level of employment, or the level of foreign exchange earnings. And I made that point because from where I sit, I think for the foreseeable future, there's going to be a significant reliance on tourism. Maybe what we have to look at is the transformation of tourism, and do that in such a manner that we strengthen the linkages and we bring along those other sectors of the economy that are not as strong as tourism, but can benefit significantly from tourism. And I believe that this pandemic has demonstrated to the country how very important tourism is. Sometimes we don't even make the relationship with the dressmaker or the fashion designer. We don't make the relationship necessarily with the entertainer. We don't make the relationship with the hair braider. But these aspects are also very important. I also wanted, Mr. President, to speak very briefly to the issue of the visitor spend, the need to improve in that area. Of course, what has happened is that, and Senator Drakes is correct, with the cruise passenger, the spend from the cruise passenger is nowhere close to that of the long stay visitor. Maybe a third of the amount of money you get from the long stay visitor you get from a cruise passenger. But I want to say that that is while Senator Drakes looked at it in its totality, we do have to recognize that as it relates to cruise, the position that I always hold is that cruise provides a direct benefit to a number of people. The beach vendor, the taxi operator, the hair braider. I mean, a lot of people benefit directly from cruise in a manner in which they don't necessarily benefit directly as it relates to long stay. So I think that that is extremely important. Of course, government has been speaking about new properties, the investment in new build. That is also very important. One of the things that we have observed is that when we have new properties coming on stream, and even when we have refurbishment of existing plant, there is the ability for the attainment of a higher ADR, average daily rate, with respect to the hotels. And when we are able to enhance our product offering, we are able then to, in a significant way, command a higher level of visitor spend. And I think that that is an emphasis that is also being given attention by the Ministry of Tourism, again, through the Barbados Tourism Marketing, Inc. I do know that there are persons at BTMI looking specifically at attractions and different activities and looking to work with local operators to enhance their product offering. And I agree with Senator Drakes that when persons come here, we want to make sure that we extract as much from them as possible. And when persons go back to their countries, that they should not be taking back with them any substantial amounts of monies, but leaving them here for the development of our country. So sir, I just wanted to make those few remarks and to say it through you, sir, to Senator Drakes, that while we differ on the methodology, we agree on the substance. And as always, from this place, I am happy to know that Senator Drake and I are on the same page. And sir, I do look forward to that day when Senator Drake and I will stand literally in the same place, wearing the same colors, in pursuit of the same goals and objectives. I thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Grant. Senator McConney.
Mr. President, what a note on which to end. Senator Grant did not say which color he would want her to be wearing, but of course I like red. Sir, I really want to thank the Honourable House for their contribution on this bill, which we know it is a necessity at this time as we have negotiated the terms, and indeed we now wish to move ahead and stick to the commitments that would have been made to the bondholders. You know, I heard Senator Drake speak about a lack of our ability to have foresight and ability, but I do not think anywhere in the world with a $15 trillion drop in the gross domestic product of the world, up until I believe it was the end of March, that anyone had that foresighting ability at this time. And I think I am heartened to hear her refer to the IMF fifth review, which spoke of the fact that Barbados's policy approaches have indeed been appropriate. And therefore, I think that as a country, we can take great pride in the fact that this government has acted prudently, we have acted responsibly, and we have been recognized internationally for the appropriate policy positions that we have taken. And indeed, as it comes to the restructuring of our debt, that is indeed one of those policy positions that's being commended. It is, sir, true that policy will have to continue to evolve in this very volatile and uncertain time, but I know the people of Barbados trust this government, as the international organizations have indeed commended us on the work that we continue to do. I want to thank Senator Grant, sir, for his response and his elucidation about the fact that there are several initiatives that are afoot to continue to expand the vision and to bring greater innovation into the tourism sector. Certainly a bill which was debated earlier today, Mr. President, with regards to the remote worker, is one of the very innovative initiatives that we have taken, where it is not to extract the spend in the short term, but to provide an experience over a longer period of time that will enable people not only to see value from Barbados, but Barbados to benefit from their additional spend at this time. So, Mr. President, it is with these few words that I beg to move that this bill be again read a second time.
Thank you, Senator McConney. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that your honor do now leave the chair and the Senate resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do now leave the chair and the Honourable Senate resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Clause 1.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 2 stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 3 stand part.
The question is that Clause 3 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 4.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 4 stand part.
The question is that Clause 4 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 5.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Clause 5 stand part.
The question is that Clause 5 stand part. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the schedule be the schedule to the bill.
The question is that the schedule be the schedule to the bill. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be now read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Needham's Point Holdings Limited Exchange and Issue of Bonds Act 2021.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be so cited. Honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. The bill is now passed and so cited.
Revert to presentation of papers, sir.
Senator McConney.
Mr. President, I am commanded to lay the annual report and financial statements of the Central Bank of Barbados for the year ended December 31st, 2020.
Public business.
Public business.
Adjourn. Yes. Mr. President, this brings us to the end of government's business for today, and I beg to move that the Senate do now adjourn until next week, Wednesday, July 28th, 2021, at 11 a.m.
The question is that the Senate do now adjourn until Wednesday, July 28th at 11 a.m. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Those against, please say no. I think the ayes have it. The Senate now stands so adjourned.